G'day mates, it's Busta here, and before the video begins, I would like to give Audible a huge shout out for sponsoring this video. So if you're unaware of what Audible actually is, it's basically an enormous online library of audiobooks that is legitimately unmatched in size and selection. They offer originals, broadcasters, news, comedy, audiobooks, and so much more. And Audible have been super generous in providing me with a link for you guys to sign up with and receive a pretty sweet deal. Audible are actually offering all of you guys a free audiobook, 2 free Audible originals, and a 30-day free trial. I actually signed up myself, and some of you guys know that I've been listening to audiobooks for years now, and a title that I would highly recommend is The Passage series by Justin Cronin. It's a great trilogy that has a very unique kind of horror-adventure tone, and I couldn't stop once I started. I actually chose the last title in the trilogy as my free audiobook for the month, and I finished it on my trip away over Christmas. And it was such a great way to make such a long, tedious trip so much more enjoyable and interesting. And now I'm actually looking to begin an epic journey into the Star Wars franchise. I'm really looking forward to listening to all the offshoot titles from the series over a whiskey at night for some much-needed downtime. Also, one thing I personally really loved about the Audible membership too is that at the beginning of every month, you can choose any audiobook as your free audiobook, and any titles you choose, you actually own them. Which is cool because you get to go back and re-listen anytime, even if you cancel your membership. And the great thing is that your free audiobook for the month can actually be of any value, even if it's of a higher value than the membership price, which is about $15 a month, and means you can save a ton of money. It also means you have literally nothing to lose and everything to gain by signing up. Oh, and you can listen anywhere, anytime, on any device, enjoy easy audiobook exchanges, and even roll over credits. So, all you have to do to start listening and capitalize on this excellent offer, guys, is go to audible.com/bbuster or text bbuster to 500 to get a free audiobook, 2 free Audible originals, and a 30-day free trial. That's audible.com/BEBUSTA or text BEBUSTA to 500 to get a free audiobook, 2 free Audible originals, and a 30-day free trial. I do hope you guys take up Audible on their generous offer here, and without further ado, let's begin. Myself and my best friend John were young Boy Scouts, and we really enjoyed camping. Working toward our merit badges, we had to camp some distance away from others, without a tent and minimum of supplies, a .22 rifle, handheld CB radio, small amount of rope, and some knives, and that was about it. One of the knives was one of those ones that had a compass and a fishing supply in the handle. We spoke with our parents about camping on a local mountain. They agreed, and we were off. So we walked down some abandoned railroad tracks that ran along the mountain. We walked for about 4 miles from my house and hiked to the top of the mountain where there was a clearing. You could actually see the clearing on the mountain from John's front porch. Our fathers joked about how they could see any fire up there using binoculars, and they wanted to see a fire burning all night. During our hike, there was nothing out of the ordinary. We spent a lot of time on the mountain, and we used old logging roads halfway up before taking small trails to get to the clearing. On the way up, we passed a young couple in their 20s or so. Well, we waved to them, but we didn't speak to them. Around 3 p.m, we reached the clearing, and we started constructing a small lean-to and building a fire. The area that we were in was wide open with little to no trees, lots of stones and huge boulder rocks. The huge boulder rocks were actually a landmark for our parents, as you could see them from everywhere pretty much. And for the next few hours, nothing really happened. We checked in on the CB radio every 2.5 hours, we used the local firefighter channel on the CB radio. This channel was an off channel that the local fire department used to chat about off-the-topic stuff like NHL games and fart jokes and stuff like that. Every time we checked in, about 20 people would respond, jokingly, but it was an awesome sense of security, so we didn't mind. Like I said, nothing out of the ordinary happened. That is, until around 11 p.m. The only reason I knew what time it was because we had to check in within about 30 minutes. We were sitting around our fire just talking and joking about who was going to call on the CB this time. And that's when we heard a loud booming noise, and it wasn't a gun because we knew what they sound like. This was like a 10-second boom that reverbed on itself and the ground vibrated softly. We looked at each other and I said, "What the hell was that?" John made this huge smile on his face and made a joke that I farted. We laughed and I pointed towards some of the large boulders where the sound seemed to have come from and jokingly said, "Your ass is over there then." Now, John is someone who was always fearless, so he got up and continued to make jokes as he walked over towards the boulders. John, just out of the firelight, I could hardly make out his outline on the night sky. I remember his exact words when he said, "Hear us, come hear us, you be..." I laughed and said, "You be what, John? You be what?" I waited no less than 30 seconds and I got up and walked towards John, just knowing that he would jump out scaring the crap out of me. As I walked towards the boulder where I last lost sight of him, bracing myself, I remember saying, "If you scare me, I'm going to shit on you when you fall asleep." I reached the boulder and I couldn't find John. I yelled for him to come out, give up, come out. About 5 minutes of searching around, and then, over the large boulders, I got just extremely scared. I don't know why, but just a sudden pain of grief fell over me and I was just petrified. Well, I ran back to the fire, grabbed the CB radio and started screaming for my dad. "Dad, John is missing. I'm scared. Dad, I think someone is after me. Dad, Dad, Dad." To this day, I don't know why I instinctively started screaming into the radio. Thinking about it all these years later, too, it was only 5 minutes since I had seen him, but for some reason I just felt really scared. So many people on the radio responded, "We're on our way, keep the fire going so that we can find you." Then my father said the words that have haunted me, and as I share this, it brings sort of fear back into me. He said, "Brian, grab your rifle, put your back to the tallest rock, and shoot anything that doesn't have a flashlight." To this day, I still don't know why he said that. He never would tell me, and he took why he said it to the grave as well. But I did as I was told. I dropped the radio and grabbed the .22 and put my back to a rock still within the light of the fire. It felt like a lifetime, but it was only 20 minutes after my dad said what he said and half the law enforcement and fire department showed up. I remember from where I was standing, I could see the headlight and the flashlights of the emergency vehicles coming towards the mountain, up the old logging trail and toward me. As they pulled up, everyone was yelling, "Brian, don't shoot, we're here, don't shoot." There were around 50 people that night that came to my cries, and they wasted no time searching for John. But no one could find him or any sign of where he went. The only thing that we found was the large knife that had the accessories in the handle and the flashlight on the top of the boulder where John went missing. This was really odd too, because these were in the lean-to with the leftover rope stuff that we had. So how the hell did they get there? Anyway, they searched for 3 days. I was interviewed by everyone in the law enforcement, but before I was interviewed by the FBI as well. The young couple was interviewed and nothing. They were woken up by all the vehicles and the emergency sirens. When the FBI got involved, they took my .22 rifle and had it checked to see if I'd recently shot it. I hadn't, obviously. They took the knives and checked them over, and they took my clothing and everything. They brought me back up the mountain, had me reenact that night. I also remember that they called me a murderer. They said that they knew that I'd killed him and I was going to jail forever. Mind you, I was only 11 years old, and this went on for a year. I used to go over to John's house and speak with his father and mother every day, asking if he had come home yet. I remember the first time his mum actually said to me, "Where is my baby? What did you do?" She said this to me every day. She would come over to my house, sit in the driveway, and I would walk out and she would roll down the window and say that in a soft voice. John's dad, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. He would talk to me and was always super nice to me. He still is to this day, and I call him every time that I think of John. Even now to this day, he never says anything out of the way towards me. John's mother had actually passed some time ago, and from what I was told, her last words were, "Ask Brian where my baby is." But to this day, no sign ever showed up of John. No body, no clothing, nothing. It haunts me still, and I have nightmares a lot still. I'm always writing down my nightmares too in a journal, hoping that I would write something that I'd forgotten, but it's almost always the same. Nothing new. The mountain where all this happened now has loads of houses on them, and they started building houses there in the late 90s. I remember going with John's father one weekend, and we searched the area when they were clearing the trees that were around that clearing, but we found nothing. Anyway, this is my story, and it's defined me and molded me into who I am today. It's affected me in just so many ways, and it's going to haunt me right to the end, I think. I'll answer any questions as best as I can, but just know that obviously all the names and everything have been changed in this story for anonymity. I did call John's father, and I asked if I could share this, and he said okay. He's an elderly man now, and I really don't want to bring any more unrest to the family than has already occurred. When I was in elementary school, I had a problem with this boy. His name was Curtis. So, at the start of 3rd grade, Curtis joined my class, and immediately everyone could tell that he was a little bit off. He would have meltdowns in class and throw things across the room, even biting others and threatening to kill our teacher. And even though Curtis was a little more than scary, I felt bad for him and would try to help him through his freakouts. I would talk to him and invite him to play during recess. And this was the beginning of a huge mistake. So after this, Curtis began to stalk me. I know it's funny to say that a kid is stalking another kid, but that is honestly exactly what it was. He would follow me home and show up at my family members' houses asking for me. He would write long stories about me and him having sex. He would pass them around the school, making sure everyone saw them. And the stories were extremely graphic. The school even had to get involved and advised him that if he didn't stop, that they would need to contact his parents and the police. And he didn't stop. And unfortunately, the school didn't keep their word. He would chase me down and pin me to the ground and kiss me, lick my face, grope me, all that sort of stuff. He would tell me that he loves me and that I'm going to have his babies. As we got older, he would bring a camera to school and take pictures of me. I would plead with him to stop and would tell the teachers what he was doing. They would confiscate his camera, but would always give it back at the end of the day. He would even tell me that he would print the pictures out and, well, you get it, to them, making sure to emphasize that he loves to finish on my face. This lasted all the way up until the very last year of middle school. I decided to go to a different school to get away from him. I had also moved and made great lengths to make sure that he never found out where. I asked my family to take alternate ways home so that he would never see our car, and I essentially just dropped off the face of the earth. Years go by though, and I saw an old friend from middle school and started to catch up. Out of curiosity, I asked about Curtis, and boy, do I regret asking more than anything. She looked shocked and was like, "What? You didn't hear?" "Well, he kidnapped a 15-year-old and he fled the state. Her parents are still looking for her and he's wanted." Curtis would be about 19 or 20 at this time. I checked into the story when I got home, and sure enough, it was true. All during high school, he would find my social media accounts and attempt to contact me, but I blocked him every time. I can't help but think too that if I hadn't have moved schools and changed my whole life around, could that have been me? Locked away in a van somewhere with Curtis? I got lucky. While I'm in intensive therapy for all the things Curtis did to me, at least I'm not locked away and never to be seen again. So I was 8 years old, living in the middle of a cornfield in Shelbyville, Indiana. Our closest neighbors were more than half a mile away, and the closest store was like a good 15-minute drive away. My mum was actually told by the landlord that her mum hung herself here in the barn outside and that she actually haunts the place. My mum obviously didn't believe her, but she still told us to freak us out. Anyways, I was getting ready for school one morning and I'm sitting on the couch tying my shoes. I had the living room light on and the kitchen light on as well because I was scared of the dark, so everything was well lit. If I look directly to my left, there's a hallway that goes straight into the kitchen, and directly in line with the hallway is my kitchen sink. So I heard some clanking to my left and look over, and I kid you not, a fucking kitchen knife was floating towards me. In that moment, it felt like my heart stopped, and I went into panic mode for a second. I screamed for my sister upstairs, and as soon as her foot hit the stairs, I watched this knife do a quick 180 and shoot back to the sink, stuck in the wall, and then fell in. I was hysterical and couldn't stop bawling my eyes out. I tried to cry, explaining to my sister what had happened, but she never believed me. I took her over to the sink, and sure enough, there was a cut in the wall that lined up perfectly with that knife. This whole experience was so vivid that I can see it happening in my head still as I'm writing this. This was my first, but not last experience with paranormal entities, and it's something that I'll never forget. So this happened 3 years ago, but requires some background. My best friend and I grew up in a sleepy wannabe New Jersey Central Florida town, and we were the outcasts. We had met in 6th grade when I overheard her talking to another classmate about bionicles, my 11-year-old self's passion at the time. But we became fast friends and soon were inseparable too. Soon began the gauntlet of sleepovers, birthday parties, and family gatherings. We were practically siblings. She was the first person that I'd come out to as bisexual, and in turn I was the first person that she told about being trans. Her home life was tumultuous, though I can't say mine was any better. In fact, we often had a habit of taking refuge at each other's houses. Like I said, we became like siblings. Now, her father was an alcoholic, strict and prone to physical discipline. Her sister was a stuck-up girl who soon gravitated towards the hicks and the jocks when we entered high school, and her mother was a pseudo-vegan hippie love child held over from the 80s. When I was 23, herself 22 at the time, we had another long night of sleeping over in order to let her escape yet another fight with her mother. She had recently lost her job at Walmart, and I was going into my first shift at Taco Bell the next day. On the drive home the next morning, she excitedly told me that since she now had her own vehicle, she would be applying at pizza places that were in need of a driver, and I was proud. It was the first time she hunted for a job on her own, as I'd usually been the one to coax her to apply where I was working. Not that she ever lasted very long. But anyway, my first day of training goes by quite well. My co-workers are friendly and try to get me to talk more. My manager likes to playfully embarrass me, a fat white guy, by trying to get me to talk hood to the other workers. Being a training day, it wasn't a very long shift, but I'd been up early in anticipation, and this was my first day on a job in a few months. I got home around noon and informed some of my internet friends that my first day went well, and around 5 p.m, I started to bed down, drained from a good day. As I'm preparing to lay in my bed, I get a stream of messages, her lamenting another fight with her mother and asking if she could come over. Now, I had started to grow a bit weary of the fights on their end. I had begun to repair my relationship with my family and a few friends as well, and I had given her advice many times on how to better approach things, and in my infinite wisdom and eagerness to sleep, I left the message on read and drifted off into slumber. Around 8 p.m, I am awakened by her bursting into my room in a panic. Having just been ripped from a dream, I'm groggy and disoriented. I drag myself to the bathroom to relieve my bladder and come back to my room, finding her rocking back and forth on my bed. It's at this time that I notice that she's covered in blood, so I ask what happened. She informs me that she just saw someone murder her mother with a knife. My mind goes blank, and in the deepest parts of my mind, alarm bells start ringing. Isn't the rocking back and forth a bit overdramatic? Why didn't she call the police? But this is my best friend. I've known her for over a decade now, and we were the only two people in the world that we could count on. So I suppress it, and I go and inform my sister and my stepfather. My mother had passed the year prior, and it was roughly a month to the anniversary of her death. We were all in a dark place, antisocial as always. It was the only way that we knew how to handle the emotional issues. When I inform my family, they immediately go to the same place as I had, though they're far more vocal about it. I offer excuses. I knew myself were flimsy, and I returned to my room, phone in hand. I convinced her to call the police, and I can hear her explain the details over the phone. A man in a black ski mask. When the cops arrive, she swears up and down that it's most likely her father. They send cars over to check the crime scene and take her in for a statement. I ride with her in the back of the cop car over to the sheriff's office. It gets to be around 2 a.m. Her sister was brought in, as was her father. I have work the next morning, and so I request to be taken home by a police officer. It takes me a while to go to sleep that morning, and the next day at work I'm really quiet, until my manager asks me what had happened. I inform him, but decide to work the rest of my training shift. When I get home, my sister informs me she had confessed. Her mother threatened to kick her out for not being able to find a job, and in a rage she had taken a kitchen knife and stabbed her repeatedly. My mind froze like a bad computer, and I turned to face my monitor. I was in a Discord call at the time, and all I could weakly say is, my best friend confessed to murdering her mother, before hanging up and just laying on my bed. Her last trial was the 7th of this month. I don't know the results, though my grandmother tells me that she took a plea deal for life in prison rather than the death penalty. I must admit that part of me wants to contest that, to demand that they take the death penalty for ridding the earth of such a peaceful and caring woman's shadow. A larger part of me, though, is just glad that she's being punished at all. This was maybe 5 or 6 years ago now. So after meeting with a couple of friends who were stationed near the bar, my friend Robin and I decided to end girls' night early, at 1 a.m. I'm horrible with street names too, so bear with me. We went to Rocket Bar, so you know it was near there, but we got in the car and started pulling out. We're driving a bit slow because we're not too familiar with the area, so we didn't want to miss any turns. I had the window rolled down because when I drink I get a bit flushed. The streets that we were on, though, were a bit dead at the time. But then we heard a yell and some really loud-ass crying. It was clearly a lady's voice, so we slowed down to see what was going on. Robin was driving and I was in the passenger seat. On our right, we saw this lady stumble out of the street holding her chest and crying. Robin locked the doors and cautiously rolled my window up, leaving only an inch open. And thank God that happened. The lady came right up to my window and said, "I need help." I asked, "What's wrong, honey?" She kept repeating, "I need help," just over and over again. Me, being a naive idiot, put my hand on the door like I'm about to open it, only to be grabbed by Robin whispering, "Don't open that door." The lady, who had been mumbling, "I need help," repeatedly like she was slurring, saw Robin stop me, and her eyes opened wide as hell, and she started yelling, "I need help, let me in." We started yelling, "Stop that," and the lady started yanking at my door handle, and Robin said, "Oh hell no," and we started pulling away. I shit you not too, the next 30 seconds were terrifying. The lady yelled to someone, "They're leaving," and we saw 2 guys run out from a car parked a few cars behind us on the right. Robin sped away like a scene in an action movie. We looked in a rearview mirror and saw the 3 of them standing in the street. And the moral of this story is, please be careful. I can't imagine what would have happened to my dumbass if it weren't for my friend that night. I know it's in a lot of us to want to help other people, but there's a lot of people out there who disguise themselves to do us harm. Be aware of your surroundings and lock your doors in DC, because, like me, it may just save your ass one night. Before I begin, yes, I made a lot of dumb decisions. Yes, I should have probably called the police, but here it goes. So, when I was around 15, I lived alone in a 2-story house. Although there were bedrooms upstairs, I would always sleep on the living room couch. This was for 2 reasons. 1, it was the central location of the house, so I could hear everything. And 2, it was actually equidistant from every exit. So one night, at around 2 in the morning I'd say, I heard somebody jiggling the front doorknob. It was a slow, cautious jiggling, like they were trying to not be heard, and when the door didn't open, they didn't stop. The jiggling slowly became less cautious and more irritated. They persisted for at least 2 minutes. They then went to the back door, which was also locked. I didn't want to call the police because I was an unemancipated minor living alone. I didn't want to be placed in foster care, and I didn't want my parents in trouble for neglect. Eventually, though, the jiggling stopped, and I stayed up that night, waiting for them to try other entrances, but nothing happened. A few nights passed, and I woke up to the sound of a door opening upstairs. The doors in the house would really stick, so they took a lot of force to open, and when you popped them loose, they made a kind of loud scrape or a pop or shutter noise kind of thing. At the time, I was actually taking sleeping pills as well, and it made it hard to fully awaken. And at the time, I would also sometimes only awaken with sleep paralysis. So that meant that I couldn't quite determine whether or not I dreamt the sound or whether I'd actually awoken from it. I started to fall back asleep, and I thought that I heard the doors close, like grinding of wood rubbing together. And then the sound of bed springs screeching, like the weight was being shifted. I thought that maybe somebody is homeless and they thought that this was an abandoned house. I was super tired and wasn't even sure if I was actually conscious, and I definitely wasn't thinking straight. But eventually I fell back asleep and I awoke to the feeling of somebody watching me. There were stairs parallel to the living room door, and I could see them from the couch. Halfway down the stairwell, I could see a long-haired man crouched over, just looking at me. It was dark, and I felt like we were both just trying to verify what we were seeing. I kept a metal baseball bat by the couch, and I grabbed it. Slowly, the man erected his body, and without turning, just backed up the stairs. I just listened for him to leave, or waited for him to come back down, but I heard neither. It was like he just stood at the top of the stairs waiting for me, and I didn't go back to sleep that night. I heard nothing, even until sunrise, and when I left for school that morning, I really questioned what I'd actually experienced. I had my boyfriend over later that evening, and as we approached the house, he said, "Hey, your window is open." I looked, and the room to the sticking door was wide open. I told him what I had experienced the night before, and he helped me check out the house, and after finding nothing, I closed the door and locked the windows. I figured that it must have been a hobo, and once they realized somebody lived there, they must have left. I still stayed there that night, but I didn't take sleeping pills. And boy, am I grateful that I didn't, because I awoke to the door opening again, and this time I knew that it was real. They knew somebody lived here, but they had still returned, which meant that this situation was getting pretty dangerous. At this time in my life, I had little value for my life, and I had no fear of death because I knew where I'd go. I decided, too, that I wasn't going to hide in my own house. So I got my baseball bat, turned on the lights, and I marched straight upstairs. I yelled something like, "Listen, buddy, I'm coming up. Be out by the time that I get there." I heard nothing, and prepared for the worst. I checked the rooms and the closets, but when I did, I found nothing, and all the windows were closed. I checked down the stairs and found nothing as well. I felt pretty silly after finding nothing, but I still stayed up that night. I got ready for school the next morning, and I saw that the window was open again. It occurred to me, too, that I hadn't checked under the beds when I'd done the search. I didn't have my bat with me, and so I bailed. But to think that an intruder was possibly hiding under the bed as I searched the house is really unnerving, to say the least. I am partially relieved, though, that I hadn't checked. If I'd bent down and come face to face with a man beneath my bed, the story may have ended very differently. This happened back when I was a freshman in high school. I had this friend who lived next door to me and asked me to accompany him to Dairy Queen to buy a vape mod from some girl from his school. We'll call him Tyler. So after school, I met up with Tyler at our apartment complex, since school had just let out for him as well. We walked to Dairy Queen, which was about 1.5 miles roughly up the street. This was in the middle of winter, so it was very cold and rainy, and so the walk took about 30 minutes. When we arrived at the Dairy Queen and waited an hour for this girl who never showed up, she eventually texted Tyler after an hour of telling him that she was getting ready, and she said that she was unable to get a ride, which was BS because she apparently lived right by the Dairy Queen. But we were annoyed and started to walk back home. We were talking about how we were going to hit the hot tub when we got back. Now, for some understanding, there was a large Walmart that you had to pass to get to Dairy Queen. And before you get to the Walmart, there's another apartment complex that we had to pass. A girl named Carly lived there and was dating our friend Dre, so we stopped at her apartment because Tyler saw her outside taking out her trash and wanted to flirt with her, which is something that he would do with every girl that he came across. But when we got there, she was visibly upset and you could tell that she'd been crying. She told Tyler that Dre had dumped her. For a bit of context too, Dre was once best friends with Tyler, but they had a falling out a few days prior to this story. All three of us would hang out at the apartment complex that Tyler and I lived at, and Dre was actually a longtime family friend of mine too. So after a few minutes of Tyler and Carly chatting, we finally left and we just headed home. As we were about to pass the Walmart, there was a big bush on the sidewalk in front of the Walmart, and as we were walking, we saw two dark figures emerge from behind the bush and look in our direction. Tyler had a lot of enemies, so he was paranoid that it was someone coming after him. I told him not to worry, as it could have been anyone, and was probably just some random homeless people, as this area was full of random transients. He suggested, though, that we cut through the back alley behind the Walmart because he was fully convinced that it was someone who wanted to jump him. I'll admit, too, that I was a bit nervous myself, as I wasn't sure what kind of enemies that he had or what they wanted, and I was afraid that they would do something to me since I was with Tyler, which in hindsight was probably a bit selfish, but hey, I was a kid. So we decided to just continue down the sidewalk that we were on and take our chances, agreeing to just book it if they tried anything. The closer we got to the sidewalk, the more sketchy the whole situation got, though, because these people just kept peeking around the bushes at us. Once we got to the bush, I was surprised to see Dre, and also a well-known thug named D, come out from behind the bush. Dre looked really pissed, and D had a weird grin on his face that made me know that they were up to no good. I also noticed that D was holding his cell phone at a kind of weird angle like he was recording or something, and that made me really nervous. Dre and D just walked up to us on the sidewalk, with D still awkwardly smirking at us, and Dre asked us where we were coming from. I didn't say anything, as I didn't want to be involved in the beef Dre and Tyler had with each other. Tyler began to try and explain to Dre that we were coming back from the Dairy Queen and that we ran into Dre's girlfriend, Carly, and that Carly was upset over their breakup. Dre didn't believe him and accused him of trying to hit on her. He said that they never broke up and accused Tyler of lying. Tyler attempted to get me involved by looking at me as if he expected me to confirm that Carly in fact said that they broke up. I froze up and I just shrugged my shoulders and tried to make it clear that I wanted no part of anything. Dre didn't say anything for a few seconds, and then after an awkward silence, Tyler attempted to part ways and walk up the street after saying goodbye to Dre. All of a sudden, Dre just shoved Tyler to the ground and then sucker punched him in the face as he crawled back to his feet. D began hysterically laughing in a very menacing way, and I just kind of stood there looking at Dre, waiting for him to come after me. You see, the night before this, I had gotten into it with Dre over text and called him a little bitch because he wouldn't forgive Tyler. I know that was immature now, but like I said, I was young and I was a kid and I was stupid. To my surprise, though, he walked past me without doing anything to me and walked up the street in the opposite direction. Now, by this point, Tyler was hysterical and started running up the street yelling at me to come on now or they're going to get me next, and I was trying to keep up with him. He yelled at me for not helping him, and at that moment, Tyler's mum pulled up next to us and we got into the car and she drove us home. He was crying at this point and told his mum what had happened. She kind of seemed dismissive of the whole thing and just said to stay away from Dre. I was just happy to be away from the whole situation, to be honest. Tyler went straight into his house, though, and didn't talk to me for a few days. I guess he was mad at me for not helping, and in my defense, though, everything happened so fast that I really didn't know what to do. Dre ended up texting me after I got home just saying, hey, and I just ignored the message. The next encounter with D was a bit more alarming, though, as he apparently did indeed want me to text. Tyler and I were just hanging out at the apartments one day when he got a text from one of his friends that Dre and D were smoking weed at the supermarket right next door to the apartments. Apparently Dre told D how I was best friends with Tyler and had been talking shit, to which D responded by suggesting that they walk over to my apartment to beat my ass. Dre told him no though because we were family friends, and so that was that. I didn't see D again until high school when he was put into my algebra class. He walked into the classroom with that same creepy smile on his face that he seemed to always have, and sat down across from my desk. He turned to me during a quiz and asked me if I remember him, to which I replied in the affirmative. He asked if I remembered when Dre punched Tyler, and once again I said yes. This kid went on about how he enjoyed watching Dre do that to Tyler and how he actually had 2 knives in his pocket that day and wanted to use them on Tyler, but Dre wouldn't let him. So, fast forward to 2018, I was walking around Sears with my fiancée trying to find baby clothes for our son, who was due soon. I hadn't heard anything about D or Dre since high school, and I received a text from an old buddy from school telling me that D got arrested for allegedly shooting some girl in the back of the head at a party. Apparently, she refused to sell him coke, so he shot her in a fit of rage, and he fled the scene and was arrested soon after that on attempted murder charges since the girl actually survived. She also ended up making a full recovery, which is quite amazing. But this wasn't the first time D had shot someone, allegedly. A year prior, he shot some kid in the leg in a drug deal gone bad, and I'm not sure if Dre is still friends with D, but as far as I know, he's not involved in the things that he used to be involved with. So, thinking back on that day when those two jumped us and they had those knives, perhaps we avoided something terrible that day, and maybe we were lucky. So, this is going to be a really long story because it took place over the span of about a year, and I'm going to tell you as much detail as I can. Honestly, though, I know that it sounds so much like a horror movie script that I won't blame you in the slightest if you don't believe a word of it. I've never shared this on the internet before, but all of my friends know about this series of events. I'll also try and keep this as coherent as possible and give some backstory. So, here goes nothing. I'm 30 now, and when I was in my teens and early 20s, I was really into weird stuff. There's a few local shops that sell unusual oddities and antiques, like art made from dead animals and skulls and pickled specimens, things like that. I started pickling my own specimens around age 20, when I figured out that it wasn't that hard. I did have some articulated skeletons, but stuff that I was really interested in was the supposedly cursed stuff. I bought things people claimed were cursed on eBay, and even drove to different states to buy things from people they claimed were haunted. I bought 3 different diebuck boxes supposedly cursed from eBay. I bought numerous haunted dolls, whatever I could find really. I had some weird taxidermy items too, like a couple of 2-headed baby chickens, a snake with 2 heads, etc. I had a few things that I wasn't supposed to have either, but I won't go into those ones. Long story short though, nothing weird ever happened. Not a thing. I never had one unusual, creepy experience with any of this stuff. I should also start this off by saying that I've never really believed in the paranormal or supernatural. Like, I wouldn't say that I'm a skeptic or anything, because I think to use that term, you have to go into something deciding that it isn't real and operate from that perspective. I'm fine with saying that I have no idea what this is and I can't explain it. I also won't say that I don't believe in ghosts because I don't really know what a ghost is supposed to be. I've always been into aliens and was really obsessed with them when I was younger too, but still never fully believed in them. I just kind of liked the idea of them. I'd never seen one or seen any real proof of one, despite poring over documentary and late-night History Channel binges. So, on the subject of all things paranormal, I guess you could say that I'm kind of like Fox Mulder, and I want to believe, but never really did. Anyway, needless to say, after the following series of events, my mind is a lot more open now, though I won't pretend that I can tell you exactly what was going on. So, I'm like 21 years old, and I'm working at Walmart at the time. And we had these steps that we would smoke on that were outside the tyre shop that led up to another parking lot for a different building. I went out to smoke one day and was by myself and sat at the top of the stairs. As I was smoking, I noticed a paper bag sitting kind of underneath one of the bushes that was there. I don't know why, but I looked in it. I was expecting to find some sort of empty beer bottle or something, but inside of the bag was a porcelain lamb. It wasn't particularly creepy looking, to be honest. It didn't have bleeding eyes or whatever. It just looked like something that would be on your grandma's shelf. It had a red ribbon around its neck and looked really new, and when I picked it up, there was a note underneath it in the bag that said, "Take me home, I'll be a good little bitch, I promise." No, really, that's what it said. It was written in red ink, and it kind of looked like female handwriting maybe. Really neat anyway. It was written on one piece of torn-out standard notebook paper, and again, I know how stupid and cliché that note sounds, but that's actually what it said. So, of course, me being me, I bought the thing inside Walmart and stashed it under a register because I was totally going to take it home, obviously. I showed it to my friend who was working there and was kind of like, "Dude, look what I just found outside, and look at this note." And he was like, "You probably should not take that home." But of course, I was going to. I mean, I live for that kind of stuff. Anyway, as soon as I set it down, I realized that it was actually a music box because I jarred it enough that I guess I made it start playing. I looked at the bottom of it, and it had one of those metal twist pins that you kind of wind up and it plays a tune. So I turned it on, and honestly, it was the least intimidating melody that I'd ever heard. It wasn't creepy at all. I was actually getting legit disappointed too, because if you wanted to pull a prank on someone with some scary object, this thing was just doing it all wrong. I don't know what the melody was too, I'd never really heard it before, but it was in no way ominous. Fast forward to the end of the workday though, I get in my car, come home, and show my then girlfriend this item. She was into all the same weird stuff that I was, so she was equally excited about this weird find. We cleared a space on her dresser for it, and from then on we just referred to it as the lamb. And shit started going down immediately, like literally the next day. So, me and my ex didn't have the greatest relationship, and I spent most of my time in the living room. She hung out in the bedroom. I'd work until around 11 at night and get home and stay on my computer playing games until like 3 in the morning. Then once she was asleep, I'd go into the bedroom and I'd go to sleep too. This way, we didn't really spend that much time together, and we both quietly preferred it that way. The very next day, I'm sitting in the living room and I hear a rustling sound coming from the kitchen. I could see the entire kitchen from where my computer was, and I assumed that it was one of our 2 cats maybe messing with something. But both cats were actually on the floor staring at the kitchen, just as confused as I was. The sound seemed like it was coming from on top of the fridge, and it sounded like something was rustling around the cereal boxes and the bags of chips and such that were up there. I assumed at first that it was a mouse because we'd found a mouse in the house before, the first specimen I ever pickled myself actually, and went over to the kitchen to check for this mouse. I turned on the light, and as I walked into the kitchen, I heard what could only be described as the Grudge noise. I've only ever seen The Grudge once because it was one of the only films that ever actually really scared me. I'm not easily frightened and generally don't care much for horror movies, but something about that long frog croak sound of The Grudge really freaked me out when I was younger. The only similar thing that's ever really scared me, recently anyway, was the screaming bear in Annihilation. But anyway, I started walking toward the fridge and I'm totally hearing this grudge noise. This is only impactful too because this is literally one of the only things I've ever really been afraid of, and it was coming directly from the top of the fridge where the rustling sound had been. I froze dead in place and so did my cats. They didn't want to go anywhere near that thing either. I had no idea what to do. I was literally on the verge of passing out. So I tried to articulate this in my head, and I decided that the fridge must be broken, and that a fan or something in it must be making a grinding noise. I crammed that thought into my head, and I sat back down in my chair and put on my headphones. I did leave the light on though, I'll admit. Normally I would just sit in total darkness. In my head though, I was really trying to convince myself that the fridge was making that noise, but I was finding it harder and harder to do so. But I also was in panic mode, and I was like, what do movies and ghost shows and shit say? Don't acknowledge it exists, right? So I became the dad in the horror movie film, and I just said, the fridge is broken, and went back to playing WoW while on the verge of jumping out of my own skin and using my headphones to drown out the noise. In fact, I actually sat there for way longer than I normally played WoW because I was genuinely terrified to either move or take my headphones off. I had this horrible thought in my head that as soon as I removed my headphones, I would hear the noise like right next to my ear and turn and would see some old woman with an empty face or some shit right next to me. And to be honest, I have no idea how long the noise went on for or when it stopped. I just literally sat there until sunrise. I never went to sleep, and I just used an Elvis playlist and chatting to my guildmates in WoW to distract me as best as I could. But I literally just sat there frozen in terror the entire night, until the sun came up and my girlfriend woke up. She came into the living room at about 8 a.m. and was pissed off at me because I never went to bed. She complained that I played games too much, even though we both knew that she didn't want me around any more than I wanted to be around her. But our relationship issues aside, she was badgering me about being on the computer all night, and I just said, I don't want to talk about it. And she kinda let it go. She softened up quite a bit though, looked a little bit confused, but I think that she could tell that I was freaked out. Then she proceeded to freak me the hell out even further. She showed me her arm and said that the cat scratched the hell out of me last night. And she indeed had what appeared to be a cat scratch down the length of her forearm. Problem was, she kept the bedroom door closed all night. And like I said, both of the cats were in the living room with me. And I hadn't moved from that chair all night. In other words, no one let the cat in the bedroom. They were in the living room with me the entire night. In fact, when sunrise finally came, they were still almost in the exact same spot, staring at the kitchen that they had been when I went back to playing WoW. I didn't say anything about it though, I just said, oh dang, and felt like I was about to be sick. But since I hadn't slept, I called into work that day, even though in reality I just really wanted to leave. So I did an unusual thing and me and my girlfriend went bowling for the day, then to a movie, and then we went to dinner, and I was clearly acting weird because we never really did anything together and I was clearly trying to avoid the house. I actually asked if she wanted to go night fishing and she finally asked me what the hell was going on. I didn't tell her though, I didn't want to really talk about it. She declined my generous offer to fish in the dark though, and we ended up just going home. We started our nightly ritual, she retired to the bedroom to watch TV, and I ended up staying in the living room. And that grudge noise started within an hour of me sitting down again. This time, as soon as it started, I willed my completely stiffened for your body to get up and walk down the hall to the bedroom. I left my computer running and WoW open and said I felt like watching TV. My girlfriend again remarked that I was acting weird, and I again declined to talk about it. I couldn't hear the grudge noise from the bedroom, which I was thankful for. I took some Benadryl and went to sleep when she did, which was hours before I normally went to sleep. The next day I went to work, and at around 9 p.m, she called me. I was the manager of the toys department and had a bit of a leeway in using my phone since no one really supervised me. So I answered, and she was on the phone freaking out. She was screaming into the phone, and I could hear knocking in the background and couldn't really make out what she was saying. Finally, I made out a sentence, and she was saying, "There's banging, someone's trying to get in through the walls." Well, I left work and I drove home and stayed on the phone with her the whole time, and at some point on my drive home, she left the house and started running down the street. I picked her up in her pajamas as I was driving back, and she said that someone was trying to break through the walls. She heard banging on the walls of the bedroom, and by this point, I was pretty fucking certain that I knew exactly what she was hearing, but I still didn't want to say anything about it. I wanted to calm her down, and I told her that it must just be squirrels. I said that I'd seen some squirrels going into a hole the side of the wall and was afraid that we might have them in our walls, in fact. This was entirely made up, but it actually did calm her down. She didn't know squirrels could live in your walls, and I convinced her that this was the case and told her that I'd call an exterminator in the morning and have them come out and check it. We went back to the house, much to my despair. My squirrel story had calmed her down, but that was very short-lived. Now, the way our house is set up, we had a bathroom that was connected to our bedroom, but not by a door, just by the wall. So you had to leave our bedroom, and the bathroom was the next room on the right, which means that the bathroom wall and our bedroom wall were the same wall. So we get inside, and she went to the bathroom and immediately started screaming again. I came into the bedroom to see what she was screaming at, and it looked like a tiger had been clawing at the bathroom wall. The one that connected to our wall, the wallpaper, and I mean, who wallpapers a bathroom anyway, was torn off about 6 feet high, and there were large gashes in the drywall beneath it. Reminder too, this is all like about 4 days into having this fucking lamb. But at this point, we just got in the car and I told her about the grudge noise. Her initial reaction was that we needed to get rid of the lamb, but something told me that I couldn't. She wanted to just donate it to a thrift shop or something, but I just had this weird sense of unease about doing it. I felt like we couldn't get rid of it like that, and I felt like someone had to know what it was and want to take it from us. I can't explain why I felt that way, but I just did. So we did what you would probably not expect, and we actually just, well, lived with it. Like, this went on every day. We even had rules about it. The first rule was we never talked about it in the house. We never even mentioned it. We pretended the lamb didn't exist. It was like that episode of Family Guy where they had a giant octopus living in the house and just no one wanted to talk about it. When we had to say something about it, we would always say, "Let's go for a drive," and we would know what it meant. The clawing at the bathroom wall, though, was getting deeper all the time. Eventually, there was a huge hole in the drywall, and it was actually starting to claw right through the drywall that was connected to our bedroom. And I don't know why, but that was when I really started to freak out. For about a year, too, we lived with everything, and we just ignored it and pretended it didn't happen. Every night, I sat with that grudge noise, things would fly off shelves, doors would slam, straight-up paranormal activity bullshit every day. One of the worst ones was one of the pickle specimen jars exploded. It was a bird that we had for a while, and the mason jar exploded on the mantel in the living room. Glass went everywhere, and it took hours to find it all. And the bird itself also completely exploded, sending body parts splattering around the living room. Quite honestly, it was just hell, and I had a few friends that I would tell about it every day when I came into work. Like, they'd ask for updates on what the lamb had been doing, and I'd tell them whatever freaky story we had for the previous day, because it was literally a daily occurrence at that point. But eventually it all came to a head, and we just couldn't ignore it anymore. My girlfriend was waking up with bruises and scratches almost every day, and it actually started to look like she was self-harming. She had a lot of piercings and tattoos, so she wasn't too troubled by the pain, but she didn't really enjoy having to wash blood out of sheets every day. And when it got too much was when I was sitting in the bathroom browsing on my phone and I heard a female voice say, "Hey, come here." So I finished my business and walked into the bedroom and said, "Did you call me?" And she replied with, "I was really hoping that was you." This was about 6 months in, and this is when it started talking, like literally speaking. And it had a little girl's voice. I know, again, that's a bit cliche and stupid sounding, but it would occasionally speak and we could hear it. We obviously never responded to it. Everything that we read on the subject told us to never ever respond. We'd hear it at our door at night, saying things like, "Hey, can I come in please? Please let me in." Now, I know you've probably tuned this out and chalked this up to some kind of excessively long, poorly written creepypasta, but I can promise you that it isn't. Her whole family knew about it as well, and all my friends did too. Everyone knew about this thing, and when we had friends come over, they'd ask us about certain stuff the lamb had destroyed, like, "What's up with your bathroom wall?" and we'd just respond by shaking our heads in the end, and they got the message. Eventually no one came to our place anymore. Everyone said that it freaked them out to be there, and they were terrified just to walk in. Even her parents stopped coming over. Her mother wouldn't even drive down our street. But still though, we ignored it. As best as we could anyway. Until one night, when I'm sitting on my computer, and a voice right behind me says, "Hey." I thought it was my girlfriend, so without turning around I said, "Yeah, what's up?" And the voice responded, "Nothing." Then I realized that it wasn't her voice, and I spun around, and nothing was there. But I knew then that I just broke the cardinal rule, and I had fucking talked to it. I just about shat a brick, grabbed my girlfriend and told her what I did while we drove around in the car. She proceeded to call me an idiot for an hour and asked what we were going to do now. And so I finally decided that it was time to Google local paranormal investigators. I contacted a local paranormal investigation agency and sent them an email with a more condensed version of everything that I just told you guys. They responded in a few hours and asked me to send them a picture of the lamb. And that was the first time since the day that we set it down that I'd ever really touched it. Also, I should note that it just didn't collect dust for some reason. But I put it in the middle of the kitchen table, grabbed my camera and took some pictures of it. I sent the pictures away in an email and then nothing. Until this point, these people had been responding to me in a matter of hours, and now suddenly a whole day had gone by. Then 2 days, and in those 2 days, everything had escalated tenfold. What I mean is that the house was never quiet now. The grudge noise could be heard outside of the home, and it just never stopped. Half the electronics didn't work, the TV barely worked, it would flicker on and off all the time, the power would go on and off, the taps would start running and then close, and the garbage disposal would turn on, the doors were slamming and opening non-stop. It was completely out of control, and we just couldn't even stay in the house anymore. Mind you, I wasn't rich. I'm living on a Walmart salary here, but we did get a hotel room. And I brought a laptop and I emailed the paranormal investigators again. And they replied to me this time and told me that the lady who answers the emails, who was also like their medium or whatever, and that when I sent her the pictures, she locked herself in her house and has refused to come out for the past 2 days. They told me that they were very sorry, but whatever I had was out of their league. So, great, right? My house is possessed, and now it's gone apeshit because I talked to it, and the paranormal investigators don't even want to fuck with it. I actually contemplated calling a priest or something, but I'm not religious, and I didn't know if I would have to have faith in the Lord or something, or whatever for it to work. So I contacted another paranormal investigation company in the area and sent them the same pics and basically begged them for help. And this time, they actually responded and were helpful, and they drove down from about 2 hours away to help us. When they showed up at our house, nothing was happening. The doors were all closed, no sounds, nothing. And then they busted out all of these gadgets that I'm not going to pretend that I knew what they did or why they were there for. Some had lights though, and some made beeps, and some buzzed. One made little lasers all over the house, and they had recorders, microphone equipment. They saged the house, walked around waggling electronics at various locations, and I don't know exactly what the hell they were doing, but I at least appreciated that they seemed to be trying. The strange thing though is that they weren't getting anything. Nothing was happening. I even recorded bits of it on my camera. And then, all of a sudden, stuff did happen. My camera quit working just out of nowhere. The battery just literally KO'd. All of their noisy equipment started making noise, and there were 3 people, and they started talking to it like, "If you're here, give me a sign." And then they asked for it to knock on stuff, and this all went on for like 2 hours. Eventually they wrapped up, and the woman who was with them said that she believed the thing inhabiting our lamb wasn't a spirit. She said that it wasn't ever a person, and it was something else. She said that it was pretending to be a little girl to try and trick us, and the fact that we weren't being tricked was angering it. They left and told me that she'll call the next day, and she said that she knew someone who might be willing to take it. I couldn't fathom who would want this thing, but my girlfriend and I spent the night in the hotel again, and I did intend to get a call from the woman the next day. She said that she had spoken with someone named John Zaffis and that he was excited and wanted the item. I didn't know who that was at the time. She told me that he was the haunted collector, but that meant nothing to me. They said that he had a paranormal museum or something. But eventually they came back to the house, got the lamb, and mailed the thing off to him. Later I realized that this dude had an entire TV show and was the nephew of Ed and Lorraine Warren. And that was basically the end. Once this Zaffis dude had agreed to take it, everything just completely stopped. We never had another weird incident again. I never did fix the bathroom wall though, and we moved out when we split up and left it like that for the people we sold the house to. I wonder what they thought of it. But anyway, on a side note, I recently, the last 6 months, watched the Conjuring movies. In a very short scene in, I believe, The Conjuring 2, there's a shot where the Warren's daughter is sleeping in her bed, and on her nightstand is an identical lamb to the one that I had, and when I saw it, I almost started crying in horror. Though the one in the film has a blue bow around its neck, and the one that I had I'm pretty sure was red, the one in the film also doesn't appear to be a music box. But before anyone asks, yes, I do still actually have pictures of it that I've sent to the original paranormal team, but unless you really, really want them, I would rather not even touch the memory card that contains them. A stint of warm weather came through our area a few weeks ago, so my family and I decided to hike our local Appalachian Trail. We were 25 minutes into our hike when my wife stops abruptly as if she was spooked. With my daughter sitting in her hiking seat attached to my backpack, I slowly shift us in the direction of my wife. What we came across was a large rock off the trail that had been spray painted with a Bible scripture. I read it out loud. Mene mene tekel, upharsin, Daniel 5:23-28. The urgent style of the writing and its intensity was unsettling to my wife. It was just really odd to see this kind of graffiti so far off the beaten path. But the AT attracts all walks of life, so I guess someone did it. I looked up the interpretation, and it goes, Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. And Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. As I'm looking this up, my wife just wants us to keep walking and starts up the trail, and then I hear the cracks of branches just off the trail behind me. I just kept that interpretation to myself, as I know it'll just really creep out my wife. Another mile into the trail, and more crackling of more branches behind us. In the intelligence community, there's a rule of thumb regarding being tracked by a person or a car. One time equals an accident. 2 times, coincidence. 3 times, enemy action. Coincidentally, it would be very unusual for deer to follow us. So I turn around to what's making these noises, and in the woods off the trail, I spot what appeared to be a man crouched over, messing with something in his bag, whistling to himself. I thought that he probably just took a piss off the trail or something, but I knew this guy had been behind us on the trail for quite a while now because of that first noise that I'd heard. Not even 100 feet further down the trail, yet again I hear another rustle and a crunch of branches. I turn 180 degrees and the man is about 20 feet in front of me, just adjacent to the trail. I look at him, but he doesn't make eye contact, just looks sporadically at different things from the ground beneath him to the trees and then looking up to the sky. And then, while looking to the sky, he says, "The days of Babylon are numbered, mene mene." I reply cold and clinically, "Hey, are you lost, buddy?" I can feel my adrenaline pumping, my ears faintly ringing, and my heartbeat pumping double time. Now I'm starting to think that I'm going to have to defend my family from a lunatic. He continues to mumble, giggle, and then just turns around and walks off into the woods. I don't know what his intentions were, but I have a feeling that he knew that we weren't soft targets. This all happened when I was about 19. I'm not the best looking dude, so I've never really had much luck with women, and I ended up on Tinder. I wasn't having much luck there either until, like, the 3rd month of using it, when a blonde woman named Katie messaged me. She was pretty enough that I just dismissed her as a bot. It wasn't until 3 days later that she messaged me again, which was odd because bots almost never message more than once. I clicked on her chat and replied, then looked at her profile. What I saw was pretty generic, but definitely wasn't a bot's profile. We'd been talking for like a month when she proposed the idea that I come and see her. I was pretty reluctant, I'll admit, as she lived nearly 8 hours from me by car, but I had to admit that I really did like her quite a bit, and I'd been thinking about asking her if I could come and see her for a while now. After a bit more badgering from her, I finally said that I would take the drive to go and see her. At this point, I really had no reason to doubt that she was who she said she was. We had video chatted every other week and called most days, and I just assumed that I honestly just got lucky. Things did get a little weird on the way there, though. She kept messaging me, asking me where I was and making sure I was still coming. At some points, when I took more than 30 minutes to respond, she'd send me a slew of annoyed texts. Admittedly, I had just chalked this all up to her being nervous about coming to see her. I was pretty nervous too, so I couldn't blame her. But I had a bit of a hard time finding the place at first. The directions she gave me were pretty confusing, and it was back through a series of gravel and dirt roads and a large thicket of trees. It was still about midday when I came onto an old-looking house. A window on the 2nd floor was boarded up, but it didn't look abandoned, just worse for wear. Katie's red buggy that she liked to talk about was parked in the front of the garage. I took out my phone and texted her that I was here. She only sent a smiley face in return. When I got out of my car to go and knock on the door, I noticed that someone was looking at me from one of the 2nd floor windows. I found it a little bit creepy, but figured it was just her father or something. She had told me a few times that he comes to stay with her every now and again, so I just ignored it and knocked on her door. She answered with a smile and even gave me a kiss, which surprised me, and I followed her inside. We sat down on a couch and started talking about our plans when I asked her about her dad. "Hey, you didn't tell me that your dad was here," I said. "Was that going to be a surprise, or—" Katie looked confused and told me that her dad wasn't here. I still thought that she was keeping up the act, and I told her that she didn't have to keep pretending, and that I had seen him looking at me through the upstairs window. And Katie went pale and said that we had to get out of there right now. We both ran out to our cars, and when I questioned Katie, she informed me that her dad wasn't there and that she had been home alone until I showed up. I called the police, and while I was on the phone giving the address, Katie gasped and pointed to the window where I had seen the guy last, because he was looking at us from out the window again. I got a better look this time, and he seemed older and frail, almost like he hadn't eaten anything in a while. He left the window after he saw that we saw him. The police took about half an hour to show up, and the whole time Katie was crying and mumbling about how she was an idiot for not keeping her doors locked. When the police finally did show up, one started asking me and Katie questions, and the other two searched the house. They came back out a little later and told me and Katie that while they didn't find anyone, they did find that the back door was hanging open, which means that whoever it was ran out into the woods, but the cops were sure that the house was empty. After the cops left, Katie asked me to stay the night because she was too scared to be in her house alone right now, and I gladly did, and we slept downstairs on the couch as Katie's bed was the room next to the one the man had been in. Katie had also brought out the shotgun that her father had given her, but she never used. I told her that it was fine, the man was gone, but she insisted, saying that she'd feel safer if we had it out. And boy, am I glad that she did. Later that night, I was still wide awake watching TV. Katie had somehow managed to fall asleep, but from the kitchen I heard the sound of a doorknob being turned. And at this point, I wasn't even scared anymore. I was just really pissed. I flipped on the light in the kitchen and pointed the gun at the kitchen door, and there he was. The guy that had been in the house before was standing on the other side of the glass door. He looked shocked, and I'm glad that we had locked the door. But eventually the man unfroze and yet again ran into the woods. I woke up Katie and told her what had happened, and we called the police yet again. When they arrived, they did a sweep of the woods and found no one yet again. They told Katie and me that it'd probably be a good idea to stay somewhere else for the night. Me and Katie said our goodbyes, and she was going to stay at her friend's house, and I was going to go home. I left a little after Katie did, and I was on the phone with my brother telling him about what had happened. My headlights were on, and as I was talking, something caught my eye. It was that man, standing at the corner of the house just watching me. Well, I gunned it out of there, and I didn't even bother calling the police again, but I did text Katie, and she said that she was going to call them again. Somehow, though, I really don't think that Katie is ever even going to want to go back to that house alone again. I lived in a pretty average-sized town my whole life. It was overrun with drugs and one of the worst homelessness problems per capita in the country. Living there, I knew not to trust anyone, but I had enough friends there that I mostly felt safe. But eventually I transferred colleges to one of the biggest, richest cities in the country, and when this happened, I'd been living there for about a year. I felt safe, even alone. My school and home were outside of the regular touristy places, and my neighborhood was mostly retired rich couples or students like myself. I felt safe walking to and from school by myself, so I really wasn't expecting this to happen. So, I normally don't give any strangers the time of day, mostly because I just didn't want to interact with people. But this day, I guess, I was just feeling talkative. I was in my neighborhood, walking back from school, but still had a few streets away from my house when I heard a voice above my music. I pulled out a headphone and stopped, and I heard a man calling out for me. I placed it behind me, but didn't see anything, and figured it must be coming from the car behind me. I don't know what was going through my head this day, and why I didn't just keep heading home, but I walked towards the car, and it was a tan SUV, not screaming danger, but I took a mental note of the first three of his license plate, and when I got to the passenger side window, it was already rolled down, and there was a man sitting in the driver's seat. He was in my general age range, had on nice clothes, a button-up tie, and he was immediately attractive. Not out of place, and not immediately untrustworthy either, but in the end I just thought that he needed directions. He asked if I went to my college, and I said yes. He told me that he sees me by the science building every day and thought that I was pretty. This is where my alarm bell started to ring a bit, because my major was nowhere close to science, and I was only ever on campus twice a week, if that. He asked my name, and I gave him a fake one, but told him that he must have mistaken me for somebody else because I was never by science. He got extremely nervous, and I started to pull away. The alarms in my head were screaming at this point. He told me to wait, though, and asked if I could take him out for a drink right now, even though it was like barely noon. I turned him down, citing the fact that I had a boyfriend. He said, "What, you can't have friends?" in a sort of condescending but forced casual way. Scared now, too, I apologized and said that my boyfriend was waiting for me. It was a lie, but I felt like he needed to know that someone was going to miss me. Now, I've never had such a strong fight or flight instinct hit me before, and I pulled away, walked away as fast as I could. I guess in the heat of the moment, I failed to check if he was following me. But the next time I head to class, I was walking up my street and stopped dead when I recognized the same car again. I feigned realizing that I forgot something, and I walked back into my house, frantically texting my boyfriend. And after that, I just stopped walking to class for a month. A few days after this, I was getting ready to leave for work, and I was working the open shift, so I was leaving my house at like 4 a.m., and even before this, I was very careful about being aware of my surroundings, especially before and after getting into my car. But as I was pulling out, I noticed his car 2 houses down from mine, closer than last time. I texted my boyfriend and let him know, and we agreed that I wasn't going to be leaving the house alone until we figured out what was going on. I work in an industry that casually attracts cops, and the morning shift especially invited at least 5 of them at any time to be hanging out in our lobby. So, I had cultivated a fairly strong and friendly relationship with a few of them. The morning that I had left and noticed him, I sat down with the cops that had gathered for the morning and explained my situation. And they said that while something definitely wasn't right, they couldn't really do anything for me because, well, no threat was made. Not long after my conversation with my cop friends, one of them was responding to a call about a suspicious vehicle, completely by accident, recognized the car as my description of his car, and remembered my story. He told me that he walked up to his car and asked what he was doing, just sitting in his car like that, citing the call that they received, and noticed obvious evidence of surveillance. A camera, a few notebooks, food wrappers, water bottles. They ran his info, and it actually turned out that he had a warrant for assault with a deadly weapon and harassment. I was called in shortly after to identify him and also to make a statement. After he was arrested, I was told that it was obvious that he'd been stalking me for weeks. He'd even documented when my boyfriend came and left and admitted to wanting to kidnap me at some point, having all the equipment to do so in his car, saying that he was just waiting for the right moment, but my boyfriend was just always in the way. I thank those cops every day for saving me from what definitely could have been the worst experience of my life, and my observant neighbors for calling his car in. I guess the moral of the story is trust your gut and always be aware of your surroundings. So I went hiking with one of my old friends. He used to be homeless and in a really bad situation with his parents, so I let him stay with me until he got on his feet. Now, one evening, before he actually started staying, he went to get his stuff from the woods that he was posted up that night. It's probably like 11 p.m. or midnight when we met up. I had work and I got off late. We go to the woods to pick up his stuff, and we kind of got lost in the dark. It was abnormally dark that night, considering the full moon was fixing to come around for its phase. Neither of us had flashlights, and my phone had died, so I couldn't use that. It was bad planning, I'll admit. But we stumbled across a bunch of decently large mounds of dirt in this offshoot of the woods. Each mound had a small tree growing from the middle and a crude blank sign at the tops. At this point, it was eerily quiet, considering that on our way over, the woods were insanely loud with cicadas and whatnot. When we hear a branch snap nearby while trying to look at these mounds, and decide to get back to finding his stuff. We eventually found his campsite and we hurried out. Outside the woods now, we're walking down a one-way street leading to the main road. A large moving truck comes our way and slowly passes us by. We pay it no mind and just nod and keep going. The truck turns around and pulls around into a sort of little offshoot on our right, stopping parallel to us with the engine on. The driver gets out and just kind of watches us. We weren't being conspicuous or anything by looking back, just glances over the shoulder here and there. Nothing that you could make out in the darkness from the distance that he was anyhow. We're almost at the top of the street and to my car when he goes to the back of his truck and I guess opens the back door. And the next thing that we hear is at least 3 dogs barking their heads off and a flashlight pointed our way. We started running and we had to do some evading through nearby neighborhood streets before we could get back to my car. Eventually we did though, and we just sped the hell out of there. And nothing ever really came of that afterwards too. No cops, no local town chatter, nothing. Well, more did, but that's a different story altogether. And at this point, I'm done with this. So, even though I consider myself a very rational, sort of sciencey person who doesn't believe in the paranormal, some experiences with my daughter have led me to at least be more open about this. And also, it's still something that I'm super fascinated with, even if I struggle to believe it. I also never really talked about the experiences that I'm about to tell you about, since I'm surrounded by people just like me who just kind of brush this stuff off. Anyway. It all started in my last apartment when my daughter was like 4. I'm a single mum and it's just been the 2 of us after I separated from her father for some time. So the first thing happened when we were both playing in her room, and she seemed very focused on our Playmobil game when this conversation happened. She says to me, "Mum, he wants to say hi." And I'm like, "What? Who? The Playmobil figurine?" And she says, "No, Mum, the monster. He's sitting right next to you. Can't you see it?" I, obviously slightly uncomfortable, say, "No, baby, I can't see him. You sure that he's there?" "Yeah, you really can't see him? He's waving at you." And then she started waving at something invisible next to me. I just kind of brushed it off as some sort of a fantasy and changed the topic back to our playing. Another time, we were also playing with her Playmobil stuff, which was between me and her, and she was sitting across with her face showing towards me. While we were playing, she annoyingly turned around and looked back and made the go-away movement with her hands and said stop. And a few seconds later, she turned around again, did the same movement and said stop it. I asked her what was wrong, and then she came to me and sat on my lap, and did the same gesture again and said go away. I asked her again what was wrong, since I was really confused, and she was like, "The monster keeps touching me and I don't like it." Honestly, this is where I started being creeped out as well. So I said, "Leave her alone, monster," and proceeded to play with her and distract her, but this is where I started to feel really uncomfortable in my apartment. The worst one, though, was definitely at night when we decided to sleep in the same bed in my room since it was the weekend. I remember I woke up at probably around 3 in the morning, I think, just after it, I'd guess, and saw her sitting on the bed just staring at the wall. I asked her why she wasn't sleeping, and she said, I can't sleep when the man is standing next to our bed." Now, as I said, I'm a pretty rational person who, for the most part, attributes these things to kids' blooming fantasies, but in that moment, it took both my non-existing balls to tell her that it's okay, and I cuddled up with her until she fell asleep, instead of freaking the hell out and leaving the apartment in the middle of the night. I still kept telling myself that it's just a fantasy and that all kids have this sort of stuff. But what was stranger to me, though, was that all these things stopped happening when we moved. She never talked about a monster or weird man again, never told me that she saw something that I couldn't see. But the really weird coincidence about all of this, though, is that in that apartment is where I had my first and only ever sleep paralysis experience. I was sleeping on my stomach as usual, and I woke up and couldn't move or speak. And suddenly I noticed something stroking my hand and whispering my name into my ear. It was super terrifying in that moment, but I know what sleep paralysis is and why it happens, and that it can cause all kinds of hallucinations, so for me it was 100% this. It never happened again, thankfully, too, but I'm also glad that I'm out of that apartment since all the weird stuff happened there only. This happened a couple of years ago while I was still in high school, and live feed cameras, those ring door cameras, were first becoming a thing. It must have been about 2014 or 2015 or somewhere around there anyway. So I used to go running in the woods right by my house in upstate Washington. The trail began very steep, almost like a hike, and then became more flat and steady, and that was where I would always begin my runs. I would run every day, roughly around the same time in the morning, around dawn, and also afternoon, before and after school. Now, I was running before school one morning, and a tall man with a beard and a plain tan hat was sitting on the bench at the beginning of the trail. I hated dealing with people because I was an awkward teenager, so I began to look at the ground and just walk by him. As I got closer, I could tell, though, that he was staring at me. I walked past him and I was going to go up the trail. I slightly turned around and saw that he had stood up and was walking the trail behind me. Keep in mind, the sun is barely coming up, so it's mostly still dark. And then I ran. This was not my normal jog too, because I was sprinting at this stage. Nobody was ever on this trail in the morning, and I'd never seen him before, and for some reason it just creeped me out. I knew that I could go through the forest basically to my backyard, so I wasn't that worried, but I was afraid that he was going to attack me or something. As I got further down the trail, I must have lost him, so I slowed down because, frankly, I was out of breath. But then I heard a man's voice say loudly as if he was screaming, "Well, aren't you going to introduce yourself?" And that was when I lost it. I called my mum and told her that I thought someone was following me on the trail. I told her a brief version of what had happened, and she told me that she could meet me with her car at the head of the trail, just in case the man was following me. She didn't want him to know where we lived. I went down a trail that shortcuts to the head of the trail and was looking out for the man the whole time. I got to my mum's car and started sobbing and crying. I don't really remember why I started sobbing. I just remember being so scared that I was going to be kidnapped. The rest of the day went normally too, and I went to school and went to all my classes, and for the most part just forgot about what had happened. The rest of the week too was pretty normal. Until Friday night, on my way home from school, I stopped at the grocery store, and on the way out, I swore that I saw the same man. I thought that I was imagining it, to be honest, so I just kind of walked to my car and we drove home. I didn't want to do much on the weekends, and so I just stayed home and chilled with my family, smoked with friends, and that was about it. I was up late with my friend Josh, just watching bad movie after bad movie, and then we started to hear a knocking on the window at around 3 in the morning. At the time, I had some annoying middle school kids in the neighborhood who were always pulling pranks, so although it was creepy, being the macho kids that we were, we just ignored it and were trying to play it off like we were ignoring the annoying middle schoolers. The knocking then transferred from the back room where we were onto the windows by the front door, though. In the morning, I told my parents, and my dad checked the Ring camera, and as you can probably guess by now, it was the same man. There were a multitude of clips of him. First, a couple of him walking past the camera as if he was walking back and forth in front of the house to see if he could see inside. Then a couple of clips of him kind of stepping back and looking up as if he was trying to look into the upstairs windows from afar. These clips ended around 1:45 in the morning, I think. Then at around 3 or 3:05, he showed up again and was tapping the windows, and we could see him clear as day in the camera. At one point, he stood back and realized the camera was there and just stared into it. He did this a few times and then got really close to the camera and whispered what sounded like, "How was your run?" He smiled and then he just walked away. My dad called the police and had them come out to the house. We showed them the camera footage, but since we did not have cameras in our house or in the back, we couldn't prove that he was actually trespassing, and there's nothing illegal about talking to somebody's doorbell. I never did see him again after that, and when the police checked back the following month, they said that they thought that once he saw the camera, he must have got freaked out and decided that he was caught and decided to drop whatever he was planning to do. It was a really terrifying situation, though. I mean, I was literally being stalked. Also, I'm a guy, so something like this has never really happened to me, and hasn't since then too, so it was just really weird and really freaky. Safe to say, though, that I got a gym membership after all of that, and I haven't gone running down that track since. So my husband and I met in college. I won't name names for the sake of privacy, but we went to one of those region's oldest colleges, over 200 years old, and it was known to be very haunted. We started dating our freshman year, and we pretty much started living together right away. I was a commuter, so I would stay over in his dorm often. And in our junior year, my husband, boyfriend at the time, Jay, landed a sweet living situation where he was able to have a bedroom to himself in a larger suite with only 2 guy suite mates. This was the ideal situation for us because it meant that I could basically live with him during the school year since he didn't have a person sharing a bedroom with him. This living situation was obviously incredibly beneficial for me, and I loved it. Aside from having to share a twin XL bed with a 6'2", 250-pound linebacker, it was pretty awesome. But it didn't take me long at all to realize just how haunted the building was. I have a ton of stories about my experiences in the building and on the campus in general, but explaining them all in one video would be way too long. I'll discuss a few of the big ones though, so that there's a bit of context. So, Jay was an RA and had to do a lot of work to prepare the suites for all the other students who would be moving in soon. And because of this, he was actually able to move in about a week before anybody else. On the day that we were moving Jay's things into the building, I had multiple sightings of a tall black shadowy figure. I would always catch it in the corner of my eye, and it would just quickly duck out of sight every time that I did a double take or tried to look at it more closely. I saw this figure probably 4 or 5 times in the move in the day and didn't think much of it until I remembered that the building was basically empty, except for Jay and me. Other experiences too included hearing voices, hearing scratching, banging, thumping at times when it couldn't be explained, a very creepy night alone on campus during a holiday break when a major storm hit and all the power went out, and more. We had a lot of creepy experiences, but my least favorite part of living in this building was honestly just the feeling that I got being there alone. If I was ever alone in any part of the room, I just immediately would feel a presence enter the space that I was in. It felt intense and loud and really scary. The best way that I can explain it is that it felt like someone was standing beside me and screaming in my face, but there was no sound. We lived with this weird presence the entire time that we were in this building, and we honestly were fine for months. But then something weird started happening. Jay would start waking up in the middle of the night by speaking a different language. I know that saying speaking in tongues sounds ridiculous, but I honestly don't know how else to describe it. I swear that he sounded like he was speaking a completely foreign language, but it was a language that I couldn't identify and had never heard before. He always sounded really intense and had an almost aggressive tone to his garbled words too, or whatever he was saying. But anyway, he woke me up by talking in his sleep like this every night for a few months, in fact. It really creeped me out, but I never really said anything about it until one night. It scared me so terribly that I honestly had no other choice. So I woke up one night to find Jay was on top of me. Remember that we shared a twin XL bed, and he's a huge guy. I was on my back, and he was straddling me with his palms flat on the bed and either side of my head. His eyes were wide open, and he was bent down and kind of staring at my face. I immediately was spooked, but just sort of played it off by saying something like, "Hi babe, you good? Is everything okay?" There was no response, and Jay just continued to stare through me and didn't even move, didn't even blink. I kept this up for a minute or two, thinking that he was potentially just being silly or was groggy from sleep and couldn't form his words. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, but was really like 3 or 4 minutes maybe. He then got off me, climbed over to me to get out of bed, and stood still in the room for a few seconds. After that, he turned sharply to look at the desk and the chair in the bedroom. He pulled the chair out from the desk, turned it around 180 degrees so that it was facing him, walked around the chair 3 times in a circle, and then stood back to face the chair directly. He stood staring at the seat of the chair for about a minute, and then got back into bed with me, and then just immediately fell asleep. The entire time that this was happening, I was just kind of watching with my mouth wide open. I know that I tried to call to him, get his attention a few times to see what he was doing, but at a certain point, all I could do was just sort of watch in bewilderment. This was definitely the strangest thing that had ever happened to me. I told Jay all about what he did the next morning, and he was really upset because it scared me so badly. He is also not and has never been a sleepwalker or a sleep talker. Shortly after this event, though, I decided to cleanse the place with some help from a friend. We did, and things really quietened down after that. Jay continued to talk in his sleep every now and again for the rest of that school year, and even here and there for the next school year. We've been married and living in our own place since we graduated, almost 2 years now, and I haven't heard Jay sleep talk or seen him sleepwalk a single time since we left living on campus. I know deep down that that building was haunted, and I really believe that whatever it was attached to Jay for some reason and tried to speak through him or something. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I'm sorry that this is a bit long. I tried to condense it as much as possible to make it an easy listen, but if anyone has any ideas as to what was going on in that building, I would love to hear from them. I want to start by saying that I'm a stay-at-home mum. A very stay-at-home loner mum with a family so far away that it doesn't feel right to have them worry. Tonight I tucked my oldest kid into bed, and on my way out to my new nightly ritual of feeding my neighbour's cat, my husband made a joke about wanting corn dogs from 7-Eleven. I don't get out much and don't mind, so I said that we needed milk anyways, and I just went on my way. The neighbours was uneventful, except that one hellcat hooked a nail into my middle finger when I was giving her treats. Because of this too, I left earlier than usual and I headed straight to the store. It's just after 9 p.m. and I pull up to the 7-Eleven, parking alongside the building, unobstructed windows spanning the entire length of the building. It's well lit. I immediately notice a gentleman in blue standing up on the sidewalk. I pay no mind but start gathering my things. My finger still really hurts, so I'm taking my time and cursing that gorgeous cat, when I hear a man's voice mumble something. My window is partially open, but my windshield is already fogging up, and when I look up, I see that he's walking towards my passenger side. He starts trying to open my door, but thank God that my kids broke that door handle and it won't open. I immediately step out of my car, and with me standing in my open door, looking out across the windshield, I say, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" And he starts saying over and over, "Are you the yellow cab? Are you the yellow cab?" I say again, "I don't know you. I'm not letting you in my car." He realizes that he can't get in and people are watching, so he starts walking away from my car and I run inside. I am a little shaken, I'll admit, but I try to sum it up to mistaken identity. But we live in a small town and our cabs are just random cars. So I'm walking around and trying to make sure that he isn't near my car, and at one point I see him looking like he was walking away. I call my husband and tell him a little bit about what happened, just to hear him say that it's probably nothing. But, corn dogs in hand, I walk out and head towards my car. Visions of this guy in my back seat flashing through my head. I see him walking away from my car, but Now he has a backpack. Something flashes on the side of the pack, and it hits me that I didn't lock my doors when I ran inside. And this piece of shit mother lover has my 5-year-old son's backpack. I don't know what the hell I was thinking, but I walked maybe 2 feet from my car and yelled, "That's my son's backpack." I thought that he might bolt, but he actually started walking back towards me instead. I said again, "That's my son's backpack." And he again starts saying, "Are you the yellow cab?" I yell louder, "That's my son's backpack, give it back to me." For a millisecond, I even consider the fact that this might not be my son's backpack, and I panic, but I'm convinced in the moment that I see the bus pass. This man is still going on about the yellow cab, and I looked at him. Furious mama bear is pissed. I take an extra long look at what he was wearing, and there were hospital blue pajama pants and a deep but vibrant blue hoodie with a WOT logo, and the O has some sort of hemisphere lines of something on it. All of this happens in a few seconds, and I just remember looking at him, pissed, and telling him that he's effed for stealing a little kid's backpack and to get the hell out of here. Maybe it's because I live in Canada, or maybe it was because I didn't leave the area where I could be seen, but he started walking away. I went inside immediately and told the clerks, but I didn't think any of us knew what to do. For a second I was going to call the cops, but it was just a backpack after all. But I just couldn't help but think about him trying to get into the car with me in it. So, in the end, I called the police. I started telling them what was happening, and then I saw the guy again. I followed him while on the phone, and I parked way ahead of him. Time passes quickly when you're on the phone with the cops, and the guy passes my car. He turns back and sees that it's me and turns around. I haven't turned off my car, so I panic, but I shift into drive and start driving away. This man wasn't scared. He was actually walking back to my car, and as I'm driving away, I tell the officer, "What the hell is he thinking? This is so dangerous. I gave you his description and his general location. I've got to go home." We finished the conversation on the way, and I gave them my info and the guys as well. I really can't tell you why I followed him as well. I mean, I follow a lot of true crime, and I guess that I just couldn't not report a man trying to get into my car, right? I told the police the same as well, and we got off the phone and I went inside. Now, my husband is good at pointing out people's hardships, and it's clear that this man had mental health issues, and I suspect some sort of addiction issue as well. He was rather thin with large scabs on his face. He kind of dumbed down how I felt about it, and I think that's why I wanted to share this. What happened, it actually scared me, and I don't know why I did what I did. But maybe it was silly, I don't know. All of it seemed stupid, I suppose, but I approached the guy, I drove after him, and I know that I'm ridiculously slow sometimes, but I did get the backpack back, but it was stupid, I know. Anyway, I received a phone call 5 minutes before I started writing this, and the police, they actually got him. He is going to the station for the night because he's extremely intoxicated. The officer's words were, we pulled up with our lights on and he asked if we were a yellow cab. A part of me feels like maybe he was just drunk or something. But a part of me also thinks that this guy was using that as an excuse as to why he would be thinking to get into my car like that. I definitely had an adrenaline rush and now I'm just really tired, but if you've gotten this far then thanks for listening and man, what a weird night. This all happened in 2007. I was 9 years old, and my friend, Hannah, was 8. Now, every summer, her parents would take us to a campsite about, maybe 3 hours from home in northern Ontario, Canada. This campsite was in the Boorwash district. You can Google search the prison for more information. But anyways, camp consisted of a few cottages or trailers set up in a large park on the shore of a large lake. Each summer we'd be greeted by our friends that we'd made the previous years and we'd have ample fun. This year, though, was different, because we met a girl named Emily. She was our age but shy. She'd never eat or stay over too late. We always assumed her parents were just strict. We had sleepovers, took photos together, and she kind of became the third in our Three Musketeers group setting. One day, we were actually swimming. There was a floating dock with a slide in it, and we decided to each take our turn to go down to make the biggest splashes. My turn came, and for some reason I was carried under the dock, and as I was trying to maneuver out from under it, Emily began holding me under the entire time. She wouldn't let go of me, and finally Hannah grabbed me and pulled me up. We both got out of the water and ran to the camp, and we were pretty freaked out that our friend would try what I saw as drowning me. The next day was the last day that we were at the camp. Emily came by and acted like nothing happened. She spent the day trying to convince us to walk along a river to a huge building. She said it was just a few hours away, but we could spend our last day there and we'd have so much fun. We both felt like something was off, though, and decided that we better not go. Nothing else happened after that, and we kind of just went home, and the following year, Emily wasn't there. A few years ago, though, we were looking at our camp pictures while celebrating my 18th birthday. When we reached the 2007 photos, we noticed Emily was missing from them. Curiously, we asked Hannah's mum, who told us she always assumed that Emily was our imaginary friend, that she had never actually seen Emily. In the photos that we have, you can clearly tell that we left spacing for Emily in between myself and Hannah in most of our photos. We decided to, without speaking to one another, write down the characteristics about Emily that would define her, and, amazingly, we wrote down the exact same thing. Green eyes, brown hair to the shoulder, very fair in skin tone and very skinny. What freaks me out the most, though, is that I remember being trapped under that dock, and I remember her holding me there. But if she wasn't real, then what was holding me under the dock? There was no way that we both imagined the same girl, same name, same experiences and descriptions of her. We also remember her trying to get us to follow a river, and we realized that the river actually went to the prison. When we started reading up on the prison too, we realized that apparently there were tons of encounters that people have had there. Now, to be clear, I'm not a believer in the paranormal per se, but this honestly just has me stumped. I have no idea why we both saw Emily and why she tried to drown me or why she wanted to lure us out to a prison, but needless to say, we did visit said prison in the middle of the night, and that in its own is a completely different story that I may someday write about, but I still cannot explain who Emily was, and how we both saw her, the same little girl, and why she wanted me drowned, and why she wanted us at the prison. I'm wondering, though, have any of you guys had a similar experience? This was maybe 5 years ago now, and to this day, it gives me the creeps. So I was with my buddy on our way to a friend's house to catch a UFC fight. We had stopped at the store for a case of beer, and on the way to my friend's house, we missed the turn. Luckily, in that neighborhood, all of the streets are sort of connected, so instead of doing a U-turn, I just told my buddy, just catch the next turn and do a full circle so we can turn around like that. The streets are pretty narrow, so it's a residential area, and we're in a pickup truck with 24-inch rims. And well, he starts slowing down, and I'm looking at a scratch-off to see if I won, when my buddy goes, "Hey look, someone's husky is just sitting in the middle of the road." I look up, and I'm like, "Nah man, that's way too big to be a husky." So I told him to switch to his high beams, and as soon as he did, whatever it was, did not like it. So like I said, my friend's truck is sitting on big wheels, and this thing still looked huge. It was maybe less than 10 feet away from us. When the light hit it, it turned its head, and when I say that we saw a human face on this thing, I mean that we could make out eyes, nose, mouth, everything. Then, it literally just spread these big-ass wings and took flight. No noise from the wings and nothing. We literally had to pull over to the side of the road to just kind of evaluate what the hell we just saw. We got to my friend's house and told them what we had just saw, but they didn't take us seriously. And we still don't know what the hell we saw that night. I was 12 years old at the time that this happened. It was the summer of 1984, and I was out of school for the season, and this particular day, my mum had to go out. She told me that she would be back in about half an hour, and then she left. And after a few minutes, I realized that I needed to use the bathroom. I went to use the normal upstairs bathroom, but I realized at that moment that I had left my Archie comic in the downstairs bathroom. I deeply disliked the basement, and I seriously disliked the downstairs bathroom, but sometimes it was necessary to use it if someone else was in the other one. I decided that I would just run down to grab my comic and head back up the stairs to do my business. So I headed downstairs on the run, but by the time that I reached the bathroom, I realized that the need to go was so urgent that I had no time to make it back up the stairs. So I sat down in the bathroom after locking the door and made the best of it. Now, this bathroom was small, and when I mean small, I mean really tiny. When I sat on the toilet, for instance, the corner of the sink sat just above my left knee, and if I stretched my arm out in front of me, I could touch the other side of the room where the shower stall curtain was. Directly to the right of me was the door, and I could easily touch the doorknob and the lock above the handle as well. The lock consisted of nothing more than a hook and eye deal, and wouldn't stand up to anyone pulling on it hard, as it would simply come out of the wall. But it was enough that if someone tried the door, that it would give them reasonable resistance, and then they would realize that the bathroom was already in use. Simple enough, and generally sufficient for what it was needed for, I suppose. But anyway, so when I went into the bathroom, even though nobody was home at the time, I shut the door and slipped the metal hook into the eye and thought nothing of it at the time. I quickly got lost in the world of Archie Andrews and the gang of characters that went to Riverdale High until I heard a noise above me. I knew nobody was home, but perhaps someone had come home while I was downstairs. I stopped reading and was listening intently when I heard the first heavy footsteps on the basement stairs. It was unusually loud as well, and sounded like whoever it belonged to was really large and very, very heavy. I knew how many stairs there were, so as the heavy thudding on the stairs came slowly and deliberately closer, I counted. 1, 2, 8, 9, 14, 16. I thought that I was scared by the time that it reached the third stair, but by the time that it had reached the 10th, I could actually hear it, and it just took my breath away. As it descended, the sound of rushing air and sort of laughter came floating down the stairs and the hallway through the bathroom door, and it gave me the shivers. I could hear it round the corner as it came to the bottom of the stairs and down the hallway towards me. I dropped the Archie book on the floor in a panic and grabbed for the door handle as I realized that it was now just outside the bathroom door. I could hear this rushing of wind still and this laughter, all at one time sort of jumbled together like many voices and calling out sort of names or something. I held onto the doorknob with all my might as it began to twist and turn in my hands as whatever was outside the door tried to get inside the bathroom with me. The door shook with the violent tugging from the other side, threatening to tear the door from the very hinges. I thought ironically for a moment that it was a good thing that I was sitting on the toilet right then, because otherwise, what was going so freely into the toilet would have definitely been flowing down my legs. Time seemed to sort of stretch on as the struggle continued, and I battled with whatever was on the other side of the door for possession of the doorknob, but I don't really know for just how long it went. It could have been only seconds, or perhaps even minutes, but for however long it was, the tears were rushing down my cheeks, and I screamed in terror the entire time. And then, just in a sort of single moment, it stopped. And I was by myself in the bathroom, still shrieking in terror at nothing. The noise was gone, the tugging and the pulling on the door was over, and there was just nothing. I sat there, shaking violently for what seemed like an eternity, not daring to let go of the doorknob lest that beast I had wrestled with was still on the other side of the door, silently waiting to hear them let go and breathe a sigh of relief, only to pounce and tear the door from its hinges. In fact, I didn't even relax a single muscle until I heard my mum's footsteps above me and heard her call for me. I screamed to her that I was downstairs and to come down and help me. Mum came rushing down after a few moments and asked if I was in the bathroom. I said yes, that I would be out in just a minute, and I quickly cleaned up and hesitantly opened the door, hoping that it was really my sweet mum and not a horrible trick of some kind. But it really was my mum, and I threw myself into her arms, sobbing and trying to tell her what just happened. She looked at me skeptically and then said, "What's your blood sugar?" I said, "What?" And again she said, "What's your blood sugar? When was the last time you checked it?" I had been diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic just 2 years before this, and although I did take great care of myself on my own, I still needed my parents' help from time to time. And she obviously thought that this was one of those times. I realized that once again she didn't believe me, instead thinking that it must be my overactive imagination and that it may have also been related to low blood sugar or something of that sort. So I went upstairs and took my blood sugar for her, and I don't really remember what it was, but it definitely was okay. But I was left with remaining sadness that my mother didn't believe me, and it wasn't the first time odd things had happened, and it definitely wasn't the last either. But years later, the way things turned out, she would eventually believe me just fine. So I know that this story is going to sound a bit like bullshit, but I can assure you that it actually happened to my cousin and I in the summer of 2018. So my cousin and I lived pretty close to each other in the suburbs of Detroit. We both love photography and taking long drives listening to music, so that's exactly what we did on this particular day. We drove for about an hour to a small town and found an abandoned barn that was also for sale. At the time, we actually didn't spot any trespassing signs, so we decided to be adventurous and go and check it out. But boy, was that a big mistake. So the barn was in semi-decent condition, although the paint had begun to peel off. Structurally, it was pretty sound though, so I didn't feel uneasy about going inside of it. I'm an avid urban explorer in Detroit and had been in far worse buildings up to this stage. But once we got inside, we somehow ended up in the basement of this barn though. And man, was I immediately getting some weird-ass vibes in there. There were little girls' clothes and toys and furniture just littered throughout the basement of this barn, and I thought it was creepy as hell, and so did my cousin. Before I continue though, behind the barn was a pretty decent-sized cornfield. This cornfield backed up right into the barn, so we decided to be artsy and take a few pics in the corn stalks. I snapped a few shots of my cousin, and we decided it's time to head back to the car. Walking through the first row of corn on my way back to my cousin's car, I see a vertebrae in the dirt. And at this point, I stopped dead in my tracks in disbelief. Like, is this actually what I think it is, or is this an animal bone of some kind? I start looking around, and oh shit, there were several more. They were too big to be a deer, and I yell for my cousin, who was almost back to the car now, and have her take a look. We both start really examining the ground, and we find more and more bones. Now, for the record too, I had actually taken cadaver lab and human anatomy in college, so I'm very familiar with the human body. We found a fibula and a fully intact femur, and that's when I really started to freak the hell out. But we decided to call the cops because we knew that this was serious at this stage. We waited in the car for a good 15 minutes, totally freaking out, until the cops arrived. Once the cops came, there was 2 of them, we all started looking through the corn and nearby trash pile. The cops, I don't think, believed us at first, and I distinctly remember them saying that they thought it was a deer carcass. That was, until I found a full-blown rib cage in the trash pile, and then they changed their tune real quick. The cops told us that they would need us to leave and that they were calling for a full forensics team out to start collecting evidence and whatnot. We were totally shaken up, and on the way out, I finally saw that no trespassing sign, and I'm sure the cops did too, but they just didn't care at that stage. We gave the cops our information, but we never did hear anything from them. I also watched the news pretty closely for the next few weeks, and I didn't see anything. But this was definitely one of the most creepy things that I've ever experienced. So, I was listening to a story on here that reminded me of my experience. I'm 21 now, but I was around 13 when this happened. So, first off, I want to say that I know that this sounds really fake, but the whole thing to me was just odd. My friend and I, both girls, were sleeping out in a tent in her paddock and just talking about school and sports, etc. It was pretty late, but we were so ecstatic to even be allowed out in the tent that we weren't sleeping. I decided that I wanted to scare her, so I pretended that I could hear breathing outside. I acted super scared and said something along the lines of, "Oh my goodness, can you hear that? Someone's outside the tent." She became super quiet, like she was trying to listen, and her face kind of dropped. Keep in mind, I was completely joking, until I actually heard breathing. I thought that I was making it up in my head, as it was just too weird of a coincidence to joke about it, and then for it to actually happen. I look over at her and she mouths, "I can hear it," and we're both frozen and sit there staring at each other, not knowing what to do. The breathing, it was pretty heavy, which made it 10 times scarier, literally starts circling the tent, and we hear footsteps that sound as though they're trying to be quiet. We sat there for about 2 minutes in complete fear. The breathing kind of stops and the footsteps abruptly sprint off behind the back end of the tent. We then see a faint blue and red light coming up her driveway. Her dad was a cop, so we thought that it was him, although I don't know why he would have his lights going, but we were 13, so we weren't the brightest. Anyway, we both took this as an opportunity to sprint across the paddock to the driveway, which was around 600 meters away, and we get to the cop, who wasn't her dad. Her dad then comes out of the house confused, as there's a cop and 2 girls who were supposed to be asleep with panicked faces. We then learned that there was an unstable guy who stole a car around their area and fled up through people's backyards trying to hide. The part that I found most messed up, though, was the fact that I tried to scare her with some bullshit lie, and then it actually happened. So my family and I moved into a new house, which is a 2x4 house. It used to have an attic, but it's been sealed off. After a couple of months into living in this house, sometimes I'm just watching TV and I hear scratching from the roof. I just play it off as a bird, as they're common where we live. After 3 weeks, the scratching has gotten worse though and more frequent. It was kind of like it was trying to scratch its way out of the roof. But by the way too, the attic entrancey thing is above the outside of my sister's room. One day my sister tells my dad that the seal is open. My dad gets confused because it was supposed to be sealed off. My dad goes to close it and realizes that it's actually really hard to open and close, so whatever opened it must have been pretty strong. And that was the point when I started to get skeptical. The same night I go to get some snacks from the fridge and I open it to find out that they're gone. I thought that my siblings must have eaten it, and in the morning my parents are going on about a missing cake, because that cake was supposed to be for my niece's birthday. They asked if I had anything to do with it, and I said no, along with my siblings. I was getting really suspicious about the attic though, so I built up the courage to go and check it out. But note too that I'm probably the most paranoid person in the world, so I was scared for my life, but my curiosity got the better of me. I get the ladder, a torch, and a knife just in case. I open the opening thingy, whatever it's called. I shine my torch in there to see nothing. But as I search more, I see the cake, empty snack packets, dirty clothes, and a short, dark silhouette. It just freezes in its spot. Immediately I bolt and scream for my parents and I tell them everything. They tell me to stay in my room and they go up and check it out, but when they do, whoever was there was gone. I'm still pretty shook up from that moment, and I still get nightmares from it from time to time. We have since moved on from that house and now live a normal, non-scary life, but it's certainly something that I'll never forget. This happened yesterday, and I still can't believe that it happened. I'm still pretty freaked out, and I'll explain it all at the end, so I'm sorry if it's a bit confusing as I'm telling it. So I've recently moved into a new flat 3 weeks ago, and I'm sharing it with my sister. The only person we know properly is a single mum who lives in the apartment next door to us. Ever since we moved in, she's been giving us advice and helping us out with things. But we don't know anyone else properly yet. From what we've seen of our neighbours though, they're mostly couples in their 30s or 40s or older guys who live alone. We're probably the youngest ones here. We're both females. I'm 18 and my sister is only 16. So today I was out with friends and then later on I went to the gym. After this I went to get my sister so that we could go out for some food, and we got in around 10 PM I think. Me and my sister though, we got into our pyjamas and were just sitting around watching TV when our buzzer rang. I jumped up to answer it, and it turned out to be our neighbour, the single mum. I asked her what was up, and she said that our dad was asking for us downstairs. Straight away, my stomach dropped, and I immediately asked her if she was sure that he said that he was our dad. The reason I asked her was to just make sure that that's actually what she said. But she replied that, yeah, he said that he was our dad and was asking for us. The neighbour asked me if she could let him into our flat, but I told her not to do that. I wanted to tell my sister, but I also didn't want to worry her right away, so I asked the neighbour not to let anyone come up yet, and I heard her repeat this to him. I couldn't hear anything for a few minutes after this, and I started to get really worried. At this point, my sister comes up to me and asks who it is. I start to feel really anxious and call out to my neighbour a few times. It must have only been about 5 minutes, but it felt like ages when she didn't reply. I was actually about to tell my sister to call the police when, eventually, she told me that he was gone. She then came up to our flat and explained what went down. She said that she was walking to her flat after finishing work and she saw a man by the buzzers. At first, she assumed that he was just somebody who lived there, until he noticed her walking up and he asked for us by name and if she could let him up to our flat. She asked him who he was and he told her that he was our dad. Now, obviously, she then buzzed us and told us first, as our neighbour doesn't know us that well, so she doesn't know what our dad looks like. She said that because you were young, she didn't want to buzz in a strange man up to our flat. She said that her mother instincts kicked in when she heard my hesitation to let him up to the flat as well. Apparently after he heard me say that as well, he got really pushy with her and started trying to move her out of the way. He kept saying to her, "It's okay, I'm their dad, let me in, I'm not going to do anything." She started arguing with him and asked him to tell her his name, but he refused to tell her. She told him that if I don't feel comfortable letting him in, then there's no way that he was getting in. His reaction was to call her a bitch and then get in a car and ride away. Now, this is the reason why I hesitated in the first place. So, we haven't spoken to our dad since I was like 16. We even considered getting a restraining order from him at one point. He's not our biological father, but we were legally adopted by him when I was 9. He was physically and verbally abusive to our mum and had actually started to do the same thing with me. It got to the point where we had to leave in the middle of the night, in fact, and after this he became very controlling and would secretly follow us and record me and my sister. He has a criminal record as well, and I do believe that he was convicted of manslaughter in the 80s. I have no idea of the backstory behind that, and I honestly don't want to know, but like I said, we haven't heard from him since, so as soon as she said the word dad, I almost had a panic attack. I asked her to describe him, and she said that because it was dark out, she couldn't really see him. And in the end, we ended up staying with her because me and my sister were really shaken up. I don't know whether to call the police or not, and I'm really lost on this one. I don't know if it's our dad or not, as it could easily just be somebody else, but I sure would appreciate some advice. I'm still trying to wrap my head around this one. So, me and my friend were walking towards a park to just go and hang out, and we discovered this sewer system. We decided to check it out because we were stupid. There was a grate covering it, but the bars were bent open enough that me and her could squeeze in. She had a really bad feeling about it. She's a super intuitive person when it comes to paranormal stuff, but I just kind of ignored it and went further in. Now, there was this big room area that the grate led into, and it had a grate on the top where the light was shining through. There was a big tunnel leading right, and a small tunnel up high that I couldn't reach on the left. The room was partially filled with water at the bottom, and there was some graffiti on the walls of the tunnel. As I looked to the left, it was super dark, so I couldn't see very well, but a long ways down there was another grate, and there was some light leaking in. And it was at this stage that I could barely make out some sort of a long, lanky thing stretched out that looked like a really skinny arm. I couldn't see a body attached to it because it was further away from me where it was darker, and I could only see it because it was in front of the light. So it was kind of shining behind it and made it pop out. Sorry if that's worded weird, but I don't know how else to describe it. All you need to know, though, is that I could see a part of it, but not the other part. And it looked like an arm stretched out, and it wasn't moving. I just kind of ignored it, thinking that it may just be a plank of wood or something propped up, because there were some planks of wood in the room that I was in. I decided to stack some rocks by the left tunnel so that I could reach it and look in. And as I looked through the tunnel, there was another room far beyond the tunnel, and it had a grate on top like my room, and the light was leaking in also. But then I noticed this grey hunched-over figure with an extremely bony body. It didn't have any clothes or hair from what I could see anyway. Its body looked super malnourished. I couldn't see its head or its legs since the tunnel was really small. All I could really see was its back, part of its neck, and the tops of its arms. It wasn't moving, and by this point, obviously I was freaking out. I went to my friend and told her what I saw. I asked for her phone so that I could take a picture to show her since she refused to go back into there, and I took the picture and then we hightailed it out of there. Sadly, I don't have the pictures anymore because the phone it was taken on had actually gotten lost at some stage in my life. We've gone back a couple of times to try and get more pictures, but never saw anything like it since. The tunnels were just empty. But after some research, I must say that I think the figures were either crawlers or greys, or maybe something like that. If anyone has any information on greys, then please let me know, because I can't really find much about them. Again, sorry if this is badly worded, but I'm not the best writer and it's super late here. If anyone needs me to elaborate on something, though, I would be happy to do so in the comments below. Also, if you have any idea of what it was or have a similar experience, then I would love to know. Thanks for listening. I lived in a sketchy part of a neighborhood, but I'd never had a job outside than helping my mum, so I was pretty naive and gullible at the time. I was out of high school and looking for a job. I'd worked with my mum junior to senior year cleaning houses, but I wanted to work somewhere else and gain some outside experience. When I graduated high school, my mum and I decided that it was time to look for another job because I needed some money for college. My mum loved to read newspapers, and we would get a Spanish newspaper every single week. I would look through it once in a while to read the comics or see job ads at the end. And one evening, I was so determined to find an ad that paid well and was something else that would give me another set of work skills. I was going through the classification section at the end of the newspaper when I found what I thought to be the perfect job for me. I don't remember word for word, but it was something along the lines of looking for young females, ages 18 to 25, for an open message position at this location. Now, the location they gave was like 0.3 miles away from where I stayed or something, so again, I thought it was perfect. I could walk to and from without having to worry about transportation since we only had one car. Massage training was going to be provided as well, and the pay was really good. And it said that our girls earn anywhere from $500 to $900 a week, and I thought, whoa, what a great wage, I can pay off my college in no time. I was so excited that I fit the profile that I showed my mum the job ad. My mum wasn't excited like I was, and she told me that it looked a little suspicious, that I should call first to see if there really was another person on the other side. So I did call, and a lady answered. I asked about the free training, how much do you really make, and where the location was exactly. She seemed really sweet on the phone and told me before we moved forward that they were doing interviews and already had other candidates on their list. She said that I could come in for an interview to see if I would make it to the second round of interviews, and I agreed. She gave me the address, and I looked it up, and when I saw that it was only 0.3 miles away from my apartment, I was really happy. So I told my mum that I was going to go to the interview at a set time, at this location, and alone. She told me that there was no way that I was going to go alone and she would come with me. I was really mad because I wanted to do this myself without her having to help me, because in my little mind I thought that I was all grown up and didn't need her help. But the day came and she drove us in the only car that we had. The address that the lady gave me was weird though, because it took us to a motel behind the shopping plaza that was next to our apartment. And it just didn't make any sense to me why they would have an interview there. So we just kind of circled the plaza looking for the place, and my mum got frustrated and told me to just call the lady for the exact location. So I did, and she told me that they were in the motel room such and such number, and that they were there because it was a safety precaution. It seemed to make sense to me, so I told her that I could still not find the place, so if she could speak to my mother and tell her exactly where the place was. And then she said, "You're with your mother?" This time, her voice changed from sweet to almost angry and a panicked one. I said yes, and I'm with her right now because she's driving me, so I passed the phone to my mum and she said hello 3 times or so. But the lady had just hung up on her. So I called 2 more times, but she just never picked up the phone. I was mad at the lady that she just hung up like that, and so we just went back home. And I never did put 2 and 2 together until about 3 years after, when I heard on the news that there was a newspaper job ad that had been busted and the people were charged with human trafficking. The ad was very similar to the one that I had read years ago, and I thanked my mum over and over because if it wasn't for her that day, I could have been dead or had been trafficked multiple times by now. I really don't know where I would have ended up. I am so grateful for my mum, despite me being so angry at her for coming with me that day, because if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be where I am today. That's for sure. For Christmas one year, I'd been given a baby doll that you could put batteries into the back of, and it would cry sometimes, and you would have to hug it, which really you just press a button on its stomach so that it would shut up. The doll was really annoying, and I only put up with it for a day or 2 before I had enough of it and took the batteries out. The only way to get it to stop is there was no off switch. I still liked the doll itself though, and played with it like a regular baby doll, and as with most of my toys, it ended up in a pile on the floor. I shared a room with my older sister, 5 years my senior, and one night we woke up to hear the baby doll crying. My sister yelled at me to try and turn the stupid toy off, and in my sleepy little kid brain, I forgot that I took the batteries out, so I pressed the button to hug it, and it just wouldn't stop crying. After several tries, I became frustrated and ripped her dress off and took the battery cover off, only to discover that there were no batteries. My sister was really annoyed at this point and asked me why I hadn't turned it off yet. I told her that it wouldn't turn off, and she said, just take out the batteries. When I told her that there weren't any batteries in the doll, she paused for a moment and said, "What do you mean there are no batteries? That's not possible." I told her that if she didn't believe me to turn on the light next to her. She did, and the moment the light came on, the doll stopped crying. We both looked at each other and screamed, and this woke my mum, dad, and older brother up, and they all rushed into our room. When we told them what happened, they, of course, didn't believe us and told us to not scare each other and go to bed. Well, we turned off the lights, and just as we're about to go back to sleep, yep, you guessed it, the doll started crying again. My sister, fed up at this point, climbed down from her top bunk, opened her bedroom window, and threw the doll out onto the concrete below. The doll never made another sound again, but I wish that was the end of the weird electrical issues in my house and paranormal experiences, but it wasn't. One of the weirdest things to happen was when I was about 16. My brother was 26 and moved out on his own, and my parents divorced when I was 8, and I lived with my mum and older sister. My sister moved into my brother's old room, giving me a room to myself. My mother is a massage therapist, and after some drama with a landlord who was subleasing a building he wasn't supposed to and just pocketing the rent money his tenants were paying, she had to move her office into our dining room. She set up a radio to play soothing spa music for her clients when they came over. For a few weeks, I would come home from school and the radio would be on pretty loud. The first time I turned it off, and when my mum came home, I asked her why she left the radio on. She said that she hadn't, so we just chalked it up to my sister. The second time was a few days later, so I asked my sister why she kept turning the radio on so loud. She looked at me as if I grew a second head and asked me what I was talking about. I explained what had happened, and she told me that it wasn't her, and I told her that Mum said it wasn't her either. This went on for a little while too. Every time all of us were out of the house at the same time, one of us would come back to the radio being turned on. It was pretty funny in a are we all having the same hallucination kind of way, but still kind of creepy too. But one night, we were all in our respective rooms and it happened. The radio turned on. It was blasting the spa music, louder than it had ever been before. We all came out and looked at each other down the hall, and my mum went downstairs and turned off the radio. She came back up the stairs and asked us if that really happened. My sister and I simply nodded our heads, and my mum, practically gleeful, starts saying that we can't be crazy because that definitely happened. I still want to hold on to the shared hallucination theory at this point. I'm already scared of the dark. I don't need another thing to be afraid of, right? But after some more discussion about how weird this was and that we were glad that we weren't just playing a prank on each other, we went back to our rooms to go to sleep. The last time the radio turned on, I was home alone actually, watching YouTube videos on my laptop when, once again, the radio started blasting so loud my ears were ringing. I called my mum for proof, and this was one of the few times in my life that she actually answered the first time I called her. We couldn't hear each other speak though, so I shouted, "That's too loud, can you turn it down?" And it stopped cold. I asked my mum if she heard that, and she confirmed that it actually happened. Me, being the scaredy baby that I was, started to cry and beg my mum to come home so the ghost wouldn't get me. My mum consoled me and said that if the ghost was still there, that at least it was playing healing music. Mum logic, right? Anyway, the radio never turned on by itself again, and my mother was able to find a new office a few months later. I sometimes wonder, though, if I offended this thing by asking it to turn down the music, so it thought, fine, I'll just leave then or something, and packed itself up and just left. Or if decided it would be more fun to mess with our other appliances and annoy the heck out of me for the rest of my life. I have a lot more stories to share, not just electrical issues too, and these are things my family members have seen in the house, and things my friends have seen or experienced here too. My mum is an energy healer as well as a massage therapist and would take me on ghost hunts with her until the time I was attacked, so I could tell you some of those stories too sometime. Anyway, I'll leave it there for now, but do let me know if you guys would like to hear more. I spent the majority of my youth in a house in CT. Originally, it was a two-family house. One side belonged to my father, and the other side belonged to my grandpa and grandma. My dad's side of the house was set up where walking through the front door you'd be in the kitchen. Immediately to the right side of the door was an L-shaped staircase, and at the bottom of the staircase to the left was a small landing or balcony with a railing. To the right was the living room, and on one wall was a door that led to my brother and I's bedroom, and on the other wall was the door to my dad's bedroom. My grandparents' side of the house was set up so that you would have to walk up a staircase to get to the front door. As soon as you entered, you were in the living room, and about 10 feet from the door was a staircase. Up the stairs to the left was the bathroom, and to the right was a spare room, and a little farther down to the left was my grandparents' bedroom. At the end of the hallway was a door. If you went through the door, you would be at the landing balcony on my dad's side of the house. The layout of the house is pretty important too. So eventually, my grandparents moved out of the house, and that divider door in the hallway was soon ripped down by my dad. Now, here's the thing though. My dad is kind of a piece of work, if I'm being honest. Because of him, that house was full of rage and hatred. He was extremely abusive, both physically and mentally or emotionally towards myself, my brother, and my grandparents too. The house was always uncomfortable to be in, and there was always just this thick negative energy in the air. My dad started dating a woman named Sharon, and she was really awesome, and my dad wasn't abusive when she was around. She also had a son named Matt. He was super cool. He had lots of friends and he was popular, he was athletic, he was everything that I wished I was. He was such a good friend to have, and, well, one night, my dad and Sharon go out for dinner. My brother was at my mum's house for the weekend, so me and Matt had the entire house to ourselves. We used to play this really messed up version of hide and seek where if you, the seeker, were close to the hider, that the hider would pop out from wherever you were and scare the crap out of the other person. So I'm standing in the living room that's on my grandparents' side of the house. They don't live in the house anymore, but saying it's their side just makes it easier to describe. I'm counting out loud, and Matt runs away to go and hide. I yell out, ready or not, here I come, and I start looking around for him, and I check the closet really quick. I check the kitchen, but he's not around. I go down to the basement, and while I'm down there checking every nook and cranny, I hear him run down the hallways above me. I dart back upstairs, and I start working my way down the long hallway that connects to the two sides of the house. The light in the hallway is off, but the light in the living room in my dad's side of the house is on, so I can see down the hallway a bit. I start moving my way down the hallway, and I see him poke his head around the corner from the landing above the stairs. I run down the hallway, and as I reach the corner of the wall, I scream, "I found you," and flip on the light. But the landing is empty. There's no Matt. Now, the only way that Matt could have gotten away is by jumping over the railing into the kitchen. I'm a little confused, as I definitely didn't hear a thud from him jumping off the railing, but I don't think much about it, to be honest. I run down to the kitchen, flip on the light, and look high and low, but once again, there's no Matt. At this point, I'm actually starting to get a little weirded out, and I get a bit of an eerie feeling. I slow down a little bit and work my way back up the stairs towards the landing. I get to the top of the stairs, and I figure out that Matt has been in one of the rooms. I start heading towards my bedroom, and I hear a bit of a clicking sound coming from the spare room across the hallway from my grandparents' old bedroom. And at this point, I know that I've got him this time. So I run to the door and grab the handle. I can turn it, but the door won't open. I'm pushing on the door, but it just won't open. It was kind of like Matt was on the other side, holding the door and wouldn't let me in. So I yell out something like, "Matt, I found you, give up." And right after that, the pressure behind the door let up and I blew right into the room. But again, there was nothing. It was empty and there was no Matt. And now, I'm beginning to lose my cool a bit. I can tell that something is just very wrong, but I don't know what. Remember, I'm probably around 12 at the time, and instead of logically figuring it out, I just kind of panic. I start yelling out for Matt, "Where are you?" And "This isn't funny, Matt, come out." And I don't get any response. I run to my bedroom and rip open the door, and there's Matt, curled up on the floor at the end of my bed. I said to him, "I think someone's in the house or something, Matt." And he starts yelling at me, "You're not funny, that wasn't funny," and now I'm even more confused. I asked him what wasn't funny, and he goes on to tell me how he hid in the bedroom and he heard me run up to the bedroom door and shut the light off from outside. How I started banging the kitchen door and how he was yelling at me to stop. How he tried to open the door, but I had locked it. How he cried for me to stop and I just kept kicking and banging on the door. But obviously, I hadn't been doing any of that. Strangely too, I never heard any banging or kicking. We both conclude, though, that someone must be in the house with us, and so we call 911. We run outside and hang out by the basketball hoop until the police show up. A cop asks us what happened, and we tell them what happened to both of us. Another cop goes into the house and looks around. They're asking where our parents are, and all we can tell them is that they're out on a date, but we don't know where. I'll tell you, too, that cop was really nice to us. I remember to this day just how kind he was to us, and after about 10 minutes, the other cop came out and told us that he didn't find anyone. I remember they kept asking us over and over if we were positive that anything actually happened. They had figured that we must have been pulling a prank or something. 2 kids standing outside in the cold, crying our eyes out because of a prank. Right. Well, the officer stayed at the house until our parents got back a little while later. They explained what happened, and my dad was not happy. And he kicked my butt pretty bad that night after Sharon and Matt went home. There was a lot of other stuff that happened in that house too, but the phantom in the hallway and the person behind the door were the scariest and most memorable. At the end of the day, I suppose it's possible that maybe I was just seeing things and maybe it was just a stuck door. I'm really not sure. But back then, I was pretty sure of what I saw, and I still am to this day. I continue to believe to this day too that there's something in that house. Also, I used to sleepwalk sometimes down to the end of our long driveway, almost like something was helping me get out of the house. Make of this what you will, but this is my story and I stand by it as being factual and accurate. And I hope you guys enjoyed. This happened to me 3 years ago in the summer of 2016. It was a usual day for me, spent behind my computer, listening to music and just playing games. I was playing Skyrim with music playing in the background on YouTube. I was done with a quest and I didn't know what to do next in the game, when suddenly my music stopped. And while there was only the sound of my small table fan blowing air, children playing in front of my apartment and the cars on the streets, in between all of those sounds I heard what sounded like heavy breathing. I didn't get scared at the time, I just thought that the autoplay on YouTube put some creepy ambience music on or something. But I didn't have time to alt-tab to change the music because there was nothing to change, and the music kept playing. But then I heard the heavy breathing in the 5-second time window that you have until the next video gets played. And at this point, I freaked out a bit. We lived in a small apartment 2nd floor, and I knew for a fact that I was home alone. My mum left to go to a friend's house, and we were the only 2 people living there. So I took down my headset, and I heard it. The heavy breathing, along with my table fan. And the breathing wasn't like heavy breathing after being scared or after running out of breath or something. I can't properly actually describe it because it sounded like normal breathing, but each breath took a little effort to take. But at this point, I'm sitting there scared in my chair, holding my headset and not moving for like 5 minutes. When I get scared, I tend to freeze. The breathing wasn't coming closer, but it was fairly loud, and after 5 minutes of just sitting there, scared to death, I decided to take out a small pocket knife that I have in the drawer that I got from my dad. It's a really short knife, but it was the best thing that I had at the moment. I braced myself, rapidly stood up and turned around, and from my room, you can see through to the kitchen to the living room, and there was nothing there. But I could still hear the breathing. After standing up, I realized that I heard only the breathing and the fan blowing at this point. The kids outside of my apartment were quiet now and not yelling anymore, and I didn't hear any cars passing on the road. At that moment, I didn't go to check out the window because I had other things on my mind, so I turned off the fan in case that was somehow making the sound. But that was a real bad idea. I was terrified at that point, but when the soothing sound of the air being blown stopped, I could hear only the breathing, and I froze again for like 5 minutes. My only option was to go and check out where the breathing was coming from. When I stepped closer towards the kitchen and the door, it got louder. The breathing had already felt really close to me because it was pretty loud, so I took another and another step, and in the middle of the kitchen, I heard the breathing like it was right next to me. It was the weirdest thing, but I eventually got to the open door sill to the living room, and when I heard it, right behind the corner, as intense and as heavy as breathing could get, like 5 inches from me to the left, behind the corner, was that thing, that person that was breathing really heavily. And so, I braced myself, ready to take on this intruder, and the second that I stepped over the doorsill, the breathing just stopped. The kids were screaming and playing again, and I could hear the cars passing by once more. I stood there for a little while, just really confused and really freaked out, but after a bit I called my mum with tears in my eyes to just come home. And that was the first and last time that I ever heard that breathing. So this has been the only time that I was truly in danger. I was around 6 years old. My family and I were just leaving the supermarket. I was begging my mum for some candy or something, and by the time that we left, I didn't get any, so I threw a huge fit. I started stomping and crying at the exit and threatened my mum that I wouldn't leave without getting the candy. She said, "Fine, then stay here," and left at the exit. This obviously made me cry and scream even louder. As she was getting closer to the car, a man approached me though. He looked at me and he just said these simple words, "Get in my van, boy, we'll catch her." And at this point, I stopped crying immediately, as I knew what stranger danger was by then, and I just looked at the guy and knew that something bad was going to happen. My mum, seeing this though, quickly rushes back, grabs my hand and yanks me away. She didn't say a word to the man, but she gave him a death glare, and needless to say, I was quiet the whole ride back home. I'm really not sure what would have happened if my mum decided to pack the groceries before she came back to get me from my little fit. I know that this is short, but I still remember those words all these years later. So, if I recall this correctly, I think this happened in my early teens. I was 13 at the time, I'd guess, around 2009. And I was really low due to issues with my dad. I would constantly listen to heavy metal, and at one point wore Slipknot shirts with pentagrams on them. Edgy teen, right? My room would be decorated with my art, and admittedly I had a large painting of a demon that I personally painted. So I hope this gives you the picture that's needed for this story. Fast forward a year into this, and my mother is trying to help me get through an emotional illness, telling me to dress in brighter clothing and to listen to different music and to get rid of my very dark decorations. By dark, I mean demon decor and pentagram shirts and whatnot. I was a skeptic at the time, still am, but I used to be stubborn and even more reluctant to believe. And she would yell at me saying, "If you keep doing things like this, you'll attract negative energies to our home, or worse, entities." I usually would just dismiss this as my mother not wanting me to be how I was and a metalhead teen, but that would soon change. So it was about 2 months later when the first encounter happened. I was sitting in the living room of the apartment that we lived in, and these apartments had these sliding doors right in the living rooms, which led to small back porches. My computer was situated next to the sliding door, so 14-year-old me was sitting by the door and the couch was just to the left of me. As my mother watched television, the sliding door was propped open because my brothers had gone out for the day and it was a regular dry and windless day in Arizona, when all of a sudden the window blinds just swung inwards wildly, as if a big gust of wind had blown them. I got up and looked and closed the sliding door, not thinking much of it, even though there was no wind, but my mother had noticed and said, "Did you see that? That was not wind. I'm sitting right next to the door and I didn't feel any wind." She dismissed it soon though too, but she was still highly suspicious. But this was definitely not the only thing. Fast forward another week later, and me and my family are in the dining area situated next to the living room, and the kitchen, as it was a small apartment. But for context, the kitchen is a small hallway space consisting of the stove, fridge, sink, and a small pantry with a sliding door. So, we're eating dinner when all of a sudden the pantry door falls down and hits the kitchen countertop. Now, me not wanting to give my mother the satisfaction of agreeing that this might be supernatural, chalked it up to just a coincidence, thinking that the door just broke and the wheel on it broke off the track. But when I went to set the door back up, I found the door intact and the wheel was just fine. Which means that in order for it to fall, someone would have to pull the small wheel down to unhinge it from the track. I must admit too that this had me slightly scared, but I didn't say anything. Fast forward now to the night of the same day, and we were already in bed when I heard my mother scream. I was so startled that I ran into her room and asked what was wrong, and she explained that she had covered herself in a blanket to cover up from the cold when she felt the sheets tighten around her legs, and she felt as if a pair of hands were grabbing at her legs. I guess at this point that anyone would have started to believe something was up, but again, not me. I was stubborn, skeptical, and again I just chalked it up to her tossing and turning in her sleep, making the sheets tighten. And so I quickly went back to bed, ignoring my mother's pleas to toss my demon memorabilia and pentagram shirts and whatnot. Fast forward 3 days now, and I'd been in my room all day, sick from school, and had been bragging to my mother that nothing had occurred so far and how she was just overreacting, when the television turned itself on to our dismay on full blast. I quickly turned it off, quite startled by this, but said nothing as my mother yelled, "See, it's that stuff and your mental attitude attracting these bad things to our home. You need to get rid of it." I blew her off though, still refusing to believe. But as I went back into my room and went to bed, secretly, I was beginning to get pretty scared. Fast forward one day, and I'd been having a good day as far as living with mental illness went, and I'd eaten 2 whole pizzas and had the feeling that I needed to take a massive dump, so I went to the bathroom. Now, my bathroom is set up like this. You enter, and next to the door is the light switch. Then the sink is there, which is about 2.5 feet long, so it's quite a reach for the light switch. I was sitting on the toilet doing my thing when the lights just all turned off. And at first I thought the lights had gone out until I heard a deep and gravelly voice chuckle and say, "You're mine." And this was definitely the last straw. I quickly tidied myself up and ran out of the bathroom. I told my mother what had happened, and a week later I threw out all of my pentagrams and Ouija board, as well as my big 4-foot demon painting that I made, and we threw it all out and had a cleansing of our home, and the activity subsided about a month later. So I'm currently in my village for vacation. My village has around 200 residents, so it's pretty much a small village. And recently, a kid was actually found dead in a field next to the church. And being a village of mostly religious people, word spread quickly that a mysterious creature of the devil did this thing to this kid. That's important for later, but for now I have to note that our house was broken into last year, and after that my grandfather installed an alarm with a motion sensor on our porch. It works only at night, and you actually can't disable it. It rings for about 15 seconds, and then it stops until it detects motion again. You might be thinking that this is a problem for our neighbors, but the nearest house is like 100 yards away, and the man who owns it is not even there at the moment. I have to note too that we also have a flickering light open on our porch pretty much always. The light is old, and that's why it's flickering. So, here's what happened. Last night it was really windy. We have some plastic chairs on our porch so we can sit whenever we want to drink our coffee watching the sunset and whatnot. And these chairs would very rarely trigger the sensor. It was annoying at times, but not enough for me to remove the chairs. So I woke up to the alarm at around 3 o'clock. I just thought it would go away, but whenever it stopped, it instantly started again, and I thought to myself that that's odd, as I stood up to go and check out what was happening. Only a wall separates the kitchen from the porch, so if you look out of the kitchen window, you can pretty much see the whole thing. I opened the blinds and just saw the flickering light and the chair moving, so I assumed that it must have just been the chair. But boy, I couldn't be more wrong about that one. I turned around to go back to my bed when I heard a really weird noise. It was not humanoid, but another noise that an animal would make. None that I know of, anyway. The closest sound that I can compare it to is kind of like one of the monsters from the movie A Quiet Place. Obviously, I froze. I hadn't closed the blinds yet, too, and I then realized that the alarm had stopped, and the light had stopped flickering and was just closed at this point. I faced the window again, and then it happened. The light opened and revealed this thing. It was greyish with huge teeth and what looked like claws. It stood on 2 feet and had red eyes. And then the thing let out just an ear-piercing scream, and after that, the light flickered again, and by the time it came back on, it had disappeared. The alarm started ringing again, and I called my mother and told her everything, and that I had to leave. She didn't believe me, and had the audacity to actually ask me if I had been drinking anything that night. I hadn't. I was completely sober. Everyone now thinks that I'm crazy too, and I don't actually tell this story anymore just because I'm afraid of what other people will say. All I know is that I know what I saw. It was 100% real, and it was the scariest thing that I've ever witnessed. I don't know how this kid was killed, but now I think that this thing may have had something to do with it. So a few important things before I tell my story. One, my kitchen has a big window next to a door, and at the right side, through the window, you can look at our backyard. It doesn't have a curtain. I always sit at our dinner table to work on school things and stuff which is placed in front of the large window too. Number two, we also have 2 dogs, a Shih Tzu, a Maltese mix. They're very sweet, but they bark a lot when they hear something outside of our house. 3, when this happened, I was home alone with my little brother, 13. And 4, my neighbors have a cat that walks around our house a lot. And with that said, here's the story. So a few months ago, my parents decided to go on a little holiday together for 2 days. My brother and I were fine with being home alone, and we didn't want our grandparents to babysit us. My parents agreed, and they left that Saturday morning. That whole day was just normal, everything went like it usually does, and when it was about 11:30 p.m., my brother and I went upstairs to sleep. I put out the lights and locked the windows and the doors, and everything still seemed usual. But at about 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my dogs loudly barking. They do this pretty often because of the neighbor's cat walking around their house, and I didn't think much of it and went back to sleep. Usually the dogs stop barking in about 5 minutes, but this time they didn't. I thought that this was pretty weird, so I got out of bed and checked on my brother. He was still asleep, so I decided not to wake him up, and I just walked downstairs myself. I went downstairs, and my dogs were barking towards the large kitchen window, which wasn't that weird since the cat walks in our garden a lot too. I put a light on and walked around the kitchen to see if something was off. Everything seemed fine though, and I then checked if maybe my dogs were in pain or something, but they weren't. So I then looked outside to see if the cat was walking around, and the cat was nowhere to be seen. I must admit too that this made me feel really uneasy. And after this, I didn't really feel like sleeping anymore, so I sat down at the dinner table to watch some YouTube and just chill out for a bit. After like 10 minutes, I started to feel uneasy again, and I had this weird feeling of just being watched from the window. I decided at some point that it was better to just shut the lights off and go back upstairs. Because I didn't feel safe though, I grabbed a kitchen knife to protect myself if anything was about to happen. When I got upstairs, I checked my brother again, and he was still safe and fast asleep. I sat down in a hallway so I could hear the things downstairs better, and after a while, my dog started barking again. At this point, I was actually pretty fearful, so I decided to call the police and then walk downstairs. The police told me that they would be here in about 15 minutes. I walked downstairs as silently as I could, and when I got into our hallway downstairs, I noticed that the light by our front door was on. This only goes on when people walk by, but I was stupid and shrugged it off as just being the neighbor's cat walking by again. When I got back into the kitchen, my dogs were still barking. So I turned the lights on and sat down again. And not even a minute after I sat down, I noticed a movement in our garden behind the large window. I just froze, and I honestly couldn't move. My dogs started barking like crazy because they could see the movement too. And it was a pretty large person moving slowly towards the door. I still had the knife, but I'm 15 and quite small. The person looked a lot larger than me, and I surely wasn't about to win against him. He also had to have seen me too, because he started moving faster towards the door. Fortunately, at this point, the police arrived and they knocked on the front door. I sprinted towards the door and let them in, and the man probably ran away because when the police investigated the backyard, he was gone. But later, with the help of a police dog, the man was arrested and charged for attempted burglary. He apparently was arrested a few years ago too because of an attempted assault. My brother and I didn't get hurt and everything turned out fine, but I still am too scared to stay home alone these days. Last week, after a bizarre dream, I experienced sleep paralysis for the first time. I woke up scared, paralyzed, and staring straight at what appeared to be a shadow person that looked like it had been standing over me while I was asleep. Last night, my fiancé told me about something that I did in my sleep that creeped me out even more than any of that. So when I woke up this morning, my hands and the muscles in my forearms were really sore. My fiancé had gotten up before me and was sitting in the kitchen on his laptop. I started making coffee, and how sore my hands were was really starting to bother me, so I mentioned it out loud. My fiancé turns out to look at me, and he looks a little confused and worried. He asks if I remember getting up last night, and I don't. I don't remember waking up at all. My fiancé is a sleep talker or walker and will get out of bed and leave the room if I let him. I routinely have to get him back into bed as he tries to sleepwalk out of the room at night. Thankfully, he normally talks a lot when he sleepwalks, and this wakes me up so that I can stop him before he gets out of the room. I, on the other hand, have never to my knowledge sleptwalk in my entire life. My fiancé has told me in the past that I do sleep talk sometimes, but normally he can't understand what I'm saying because I'm whispering or that I don't say anything at all. I just laugh for a few seconds and then I get quiet again. So after I confirm that I do not remember waking up, he tells me that not only did I wake up, I also got out of bed. He says that he woke up because the bed was shaking. He sat up in bed and I was standing at the foot of the bed, gripping the footboard. He said every few seconds I would jerk on the footboard, and it somehow managed to drag the whole king-sized bed with him in it, like 2 feet away from the wall. He was able to get me to let go of the footboard and get me to go back to bed. He said that the entire time I never said a word, but my eyes were wide open, and that I was looking right at him while he was talking. I honestly don't remember any of this, and I'm not sure if this is paranormal or something else, but it really creeped me out, especially since I've been having these sleep paralysis moments lately. Hopefully this is the end of it, but somehow I don't think it is. I've been having a lot of what I believe to be paranormal activity in the apartment that myself and my boyfriend moved into about 6 months ago. But the first month or so after moving in, I didn't notice anything unusual. Then I started to notice little things like cupboards being open that I know were closed, some with doors, and I even heard footsteps shuffling across the floor in the next room, candles always being blown out when I'd leave a room, shadows moving across the wall, or dark figures out of the corner of my eye even. And then it progressively got worse as well. But one night, my boyfriend and I were upstairs talking with our landlord who lived there. I was telling him about some of the things that had been going on while my boyfriend, the non-believer, just rolled his eyes. Our landlord wanted to come down into the apartment to look at a few things in the kitchen anyway. We all came down and every single cupboard was wide open. After assuring my boyfriend that it wasn't me playing a prank, he got pretty freaked out and went back upstairs. My landlord and I continued talking when we both heard a deep growling coming from the area of my closet in the bedroom. But we were about 10 feet from the bedroom, and he just said, "Nope," and went back upstairs. He's refused to talk about it since then. I still get chills thinking about it too. Another night, I was laying in bed trying to sleep, eyes closed but very much awake, and I felt my boyfriend sit on the bed, so I opened my eyes and looked at him. He was just silently laughing at me and shaking a closed fist in my face, which was really weird. I sat up and asked him, "What the heck are you doing? Leave me alone." I'm pregnant, so I was getting pretty grumpy easily at the time. I asked him the same thing again, and when he didn't answer and he just smirked at me with his fist in the air, I grabbed my pillow and rolled over to the other side of the bed, laid there for about 30 seconds, but still felt the need to yap at him some more. I was pretty ticked off. He knew I was sick and needed rest. So I got up and went into the living room and asked him what his problem was, and he had no idea what I was talking about. I thought he might have been screwing with me, but after seeing how visibly shaken I was and not being the type to intentionally scare me, I believe it wasn't actually him that I saw. He made me a little snack and put me back to bed and laid with me until I fell asleep. But I woke up not long after because my bedroom doorknob was being turned back and forth very rapid and really loudly. I sat up and looked at the door and it stopped. 100% freaked out but tired, I went back to sleep. And then it happens again. I popped up and actually saw it go back and forth this time a few times before it stopped as well. I got up and swung the door open and no one was there. Boyfriend was outside smoking and I was alone in the apartment. In the weeks following, I'd feel my wrist get grabbed or my leg too. I'd feel what felt like the bed being compressed as if someone was crawling across it, but I was alone. And one evening, I heard footsteps in the kitchen, so I went to investigate. I stood in the doorway and they stopped. A few seconds later, and the top of one of the roses popped off and flew a few feet. And at that point, I noped out of there pretty quick and went into my bedroom to text my boyfriend to get his ass home. The longer I sat alone, too, the more uneasy I became, so I said screw it, went into the kitchen to make something to eat, threw all the lights on, TV on for noise, and I felt better, I must admit. As I was cooking, I began to feel really lightheaded, though. Everything started going black, so I went as fast as I could towards the couch, and I just collapsed onto it as I blacked out. Now, I've never blacked out or fainted in my life, and when I sat back up, all my candles were blown out, and there were leaves from my roses just scattered everywhere. Recently, too, I went out with friends, and my boyfriend kept texting me asking when I was coming home. I thought that was pretty cute and that he was missing me, so I finally get home, and he looked really spooked. He said that all night he was hearing footsteps, doors closing, door handles turning, and even saw a human-like shadow move across the wall. And guess who's a believer now, whether he wanted to or not. Since these incidents, many of the small things continue to occur, but I haven't experienced anything evil in a little while, thankfully. Knock on wood though, right? I've had other paranormal encounters in my life, much less creepy, when my family member and my best friend after she passed, but this feels evil. If it starts up again, we've already agreed that we're going to move. Our son is due at the end of July, so there's not a chance that we'll stay if the evil presents itself again. But I am wondering if we should just move anyway. Better to be safe than sorry, right? What's your opinion on what I'm dealing with here? A few years back, one of my best friends and business partner was and still is a single dad. His ex-wife was, unfortunately, in and out of mental institution for years, and he had sole custody of his two kids, a boy 10 and a girl 14. My friend had to travel to New York to oversee the multimedia setup for the auto show for the Ford display, and I was back at the office with the programmers during the day and would stay with the kids each evening. Their house was a new 2-story rental in the woodlands of Texas. The development was built in a heavily wooded area just north of Houston for anyone interested. Now, weird stuff started happening the very first night that I was there. I was watching TV with the kids, the den lights would go off, and the light switch was on the other side of the room, which was weird. I went over, and the switch was turned off. I thought it was a problem with the breaker, or there was another light switch or something, but if there is another switch, who turned that one off then? I flipped the switch on either way, and the lights came back on, and I went back to sit down. The lights went off again, and I walked back, and I found the switch flipped back down to off. And that really disturbed me. But this went on for a while. I asked the kids if this had happened before, and they told me every now and then the lights would go off. So now I'm trying to act unconcerned in front of the kids. Suddenly, though, there was a loud crash in the attic. We went upstairs and opened the attic door to check, and there was nothing in the attic. It was completely empty, and there was no explanation for what made the loud noise. At this point, I'm thinking there's somebody else in the house. I mean, there has to be, right? Their mother had actually showed up unexpectedly before at their old house, but she was in jail at the time and supposedly didn't even know this address. things quieted down, and it was eventually time to go to bed, though. I let the family dog in, a lab, checked all the doors and made sure that they were locked, and then went up to the guest room, which was between the kids' bedrooms. I left my door cracked, and I just turned the bedside lamp off, and I was laying down, and I saw the silhouette of a boy crouched between the cable box, the VCR, where the lights are on the other side of the room, and myself. I thought the sun was getting ready to try and scare me or something, so I turned the bedside lamp on and said, "Gotcha," but when I did, there was nobody there. And then there was another loud crash in the attic. This woke the kids up too, and now they were really scared. We then heard a door slam downstairs, and I told them that it was a new house and, well, noises happen. I also told them that I would sleep in the daybed out in the hallway. I made my rounds again and, well, all went back to bed. When I woke up the next morning, the kids and the dog were all asleep on the floor next to my bed, and I still had 4 more days to go. So the next day I got to the house as it was getting dark. The wind was starting to pick up and all of the tree limbs were swaying. There was thunder in the distance, but the kids seemed pretty fine, and I helped them with their homework, made dinner, told them no, that we're not going to McDonald's again, and we all finally sat down to watch some TV. The storm was worsening, and there was more thunder and lightning now too. So the den in the house was huge, with large floor-to-ceiling windows, and the walls went all the way to the rafters. There was an interior balcony on the second floor that wrapped around 3 of the walls. There was an exterior balcony facing the backyard. You could see through the upper windows out to the lower part of the outside balcony. And now, the rain was just coming down in sheets. The wind is blowing and there's bursts of lightning, and suddenly, the daughter says that she sees something moving out on the balcony. I look up and it looks like a pair of legs in dark pants scurries past one of the windows. So I'm thinking, do I get a gun out of the master bedroom? But that opens a whole new can of worms. So I run back up the stairs from the kitchen to the second floor hallway and out through the balcony door. The wind is blowing cold rain right into me and I get soaked, and I also don't see anyone on the balcony. I go back upstairs and tell them that there's no one outside. Shortly thereafter, I tell them it's time for bed as well. The son goes right to bed and goes to sleep. The daughter is afraid of storms though, and the dog won't go into her bedroom, and her cat is nowhere to be found. I tell her that I'll sit with her until she goes to sleep, and I bring a chair into the bedroom and set it on the left side of her bed. We talk about storms, and I tell her about being in a tent in the army during really bad storms and how nice it is to be in a house for this storm. And eventually, we both fall asleep. There's a loud clap of thunder and a flash of lightning, and I wake up and I see a dark figure, about 5 feet tall, standing in the far corner of her room. I jump to my feet, but now I don't see anything. I don't want to wake her up, and I carefully walk around her room and check the hallway. I slowly sit back down, really confused, and I eventually just doze off again. Later, I hear a noise though, and I startlingly looked around. The cat is curled up on the foot of her bed, and the dog is starting to lay down at my feet. The storm has passed now, and looking outside her bedroom window, stars are shining up above the tree line. I go to lay down in the daybed, out in the hallway again, and just as I fall asleep, I hear a door downstairs slam shut. It kinda sounds like the kitchen door to the garage, maybe. I go downstairs. The kitchen door and the door to the garage and the front door are all shut and locked. So I start to walk over to the master bedroom suite, but something just tells me not to go there. So I head back upstairs and lay back down, and what seems like seconds later, the alarm goes off and it's time to start a new day. I have to get breakfast going, and then it's my turn to drive school carpool. My friend was due back late on Saturday from the airport. I was ready to head back to my house, where I also took care of my dad. My dad had been having some health issues and whatnot, and we, the interactive media company, had to get several laptops with updated programs on them sent out via FedEx for tomorrow delivery to the Ford Auto show booth. I dropped those off at the FedEx counter at the IAH cargo area, and I then drove up north on the I-45 to the house. We stayed up late, but everything seemed quiet this night. I had taken to sleeping in the daybed in the hallway on the second floor where the kids' bedrooms were, and after the kids finally went to sleep, I checked all the doors again and turned out most of the lights and went back up to the daybed to go to sleep. However, the family lab just wouldn't come upstairs though, and there was no sign of the cat again. The hallway was partially lit from the kitchen light coming up from the back stairs just off to the left, and the glass door out to the balcony at the other end of the hall. On the opposing end of the hall, there were 3 steps leading up to the girls' bedroom. Both kids had their doors shut, and I was sound asleep when I just had this feeling that someone was in the hallway with us. I sat up in bed and was startled to see a young boy standing in the hallway. Except he wasn't really standing. He was kind of hovering about 1 foot off the floor. He seemed to be lit slightly from within, and he kind of gave off a dim glow, and he was clearly visible in the darkened hallway. He was looking directly down at me, with his head tilted slightly downward. He had a blank neutral expression on his face, and he looked to be about 12 years old, had blonde hair with freckles, but with large dark eyes. He was wearing a well-worn pair of coveralls and a faded yellow shirt. His clothes were faded, well-worn but clean. He was barefoot and his feet pointed downwards towards the floor. His arms hung down by his sides. I asked him in a low voice, "What do you want?" And after saying those words, he started immediately drifting slowly toward the stairwell. He kept looking at me, but he didn't blink his eyes or change his expression. He rotated slightly to the right as he floated towards the stairway to keep facing me. His faint glow cast a small amount of light on the surrounding walls, floor and ceiling. He then floated out of view, and I could still see his glow on the far wall of the stairwell and could see it moving downwards following the stair steps. I sat there for a few moments with my heart racing, and the glow faded along the wall, and he should have been down to the landing on the stairs by then, and I went to look down the stairway, and he was gone. And a few moments later, I heard a loud slam of a door on the ground level near the master bedroom on the other side of the house. I didn't really sleep that night, and I woke up the next morning and did my duties, and I haven't been back to that house since then. My whole life I've had weird experiences, and that's how I categorize them too. Weird. Not abruptly paranormal, but just strange. There's some quick background too about me to give some fleshed out characterization as to what I'm about to share. I'm a male in my 30s from New Zealand. I don't suffer from any psychological or mental issues, or none that I'm aware of anyway. I grew up in a distinctly lowerish middle-class family in the suburbs over the tracks, and I have a healthy appetite for logical thinking, and most of my experiences I have some sort of logical explanation as to why it happened, but some are still just weird. And so, here's some of my stories. So at about age 5 to 6 was my first weird experience. I remember I was young because I was either at the end of my time at kindergarten or just beginning primary school. I had been asleep for a while when I felt fingers touch the right side of my neck where the jugular vein is. The fingers were distinctly female fingers too, but old and wrinkly, like my grandmother's. I remember being calm because since I was waking up out of my sleep and feeling female fingers, I guess because I equated male fingers to being rough and large like my dad's, I assumed that they were just my mother's. It wasn't until I opened my eyes to a dark room with no one else in there that I started to really feel terrified. I rolled over, threw the sheets over my head, forced my eyes shut, and fell back asleep terrified. Now, this could easily have been some sort of sleep paralysis, but to this day, as a grown-ass man, I still can't sleep without the bedsheets over my neck. At about age 7-ish to 9 too, I would have shadows taunt me from my bedroom doorframe in the shapes of cartoon characters. I've only experienced shadow people once in my life, and I'll get to that later, but this was different from that and from what I've read as well. My bedroom was connected to a hallway, which was also connected to our lounge. So, lounge, hallway, and then bedroom, with my doorframe adjacent to the doorframe that led into the lounge. I mention this too because the lounge area of the house has a lot of windows that let in a lot of ambient light at night. I would wake up in the middle of the night, have no idea why I just woke up, and see a dark shadowy figure slightly poke their head up or upper body out from behind the door frame, so it was like that they were standing in the hallway. I'm not sure why I thought that they were taunting or goading me, because all they ever did was poke some body part out from the doorframe, and once they noticed that I was awake watching them, they'd keep doing it, almost like they knew that they were keeping me up, terrified so that I couldn't sleep. Some nights I'd have the shadowy silhouettes of Big Bird and Fozzie Bear, and other nights it would be Scooby-Doo or Barney the Dinosaur. Full disclosure too, I didn't watch Barney the Dinosaur myself, but it was on in the background if I was being looked after with my little cousin after school. This continued for a couple of years, and I guess it just kind of stopped. I will still sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and check the doorframe for shadows, but I haven't experienced it since I was a kid. Again, this is most likely just sleep paralysis, but has anyone else experienced this kind of thing before? At age 9 and 10, my mother had a handful of jobs growing up. One job that she had was a caregiver for an elderly couple who lived just across the road from us. The couple got along well with my family, so some weekends my mother and father would go to their house to do odd jobs. One such Saturday, my mother, father, and sister had gone across the road and left me by myself at home to play Aero the Acrobat on Sega in the lounge. Only a few minutes after everyone else had left was when I felt an incredible sense of dread and panic just come across me. It felt like someone was behind me, and I could feel the anger and the hate coming off of them, and it was directed towards me. I was sat there frozen with fear, and in that time I decided that if I sat upright and bolted straight to the sliding door to my right in one motion, that I could make it down the driveway and across the road to my family before something bad happened to me. And so that's what I did. I bolted for the door and made it out of the house, and I was just too scared to look back. As soon as I reached the road, though, I instantly felt like an idiot. Why am I running away from a feeling? It was a terrifying feeling, but it was just a feeling. But I kept running as a sprint until I got to my mum doing gardening, and that's where I stayed until everyone went back home. That one I can't quite explain, other than a kid home alone had an active over-imagination, but I do distinctly remember that feeling of anger and hate, and I've not felt something like that since then. At age 10 and 11, my parents decided to renovate the house, and they started with their bedroom first. All of their stuff, including their bed, was in the lounge opposite my room. So I wake up late at night, really needing to take a leak. I get up, get to the doorway of my bedroom, and make direct eye contact with this doll that my mum has. It's not a typical porcelain doll, but it's close enough with a frilly dress, a bonnet, and a music box built into it. This doll doesn't scare me in the least, as much as it should have, I guess, but it just never did. My sister always hated it, though, and it always gave her the creeps. But as soon as my foot hits the hallway and my eyes make contact with the doll's eyes, I, clear as day, hear my full name whispered by a female voice in my right ear from behind me. I'm in the hallway. I can hear my mother and father snoring because their bed is in the lounge, and my sister definitely is not behind me and very rarely ever has said my full name. And so I just turn back around and jump back into bed with the sheets over my head, deciding that I don't really need to take a leak after all. I tell my mum the next morning, and she just kind of laughs and says that I was probably imagining things. I never told my sister that story until a few years ago, and she's adamant that it definitely wasn't her as well. It's very possible that it was an auditory hallucination, but still, it was weird. Age 14 now, and I was enjoying a good book on the toilet like any kid in the early 2000s would at around 9 or 10 p.m. I noticed something from my peripheral vision above my book, which was on the floor beneath the door, which looked to be some kind of twine that I could swear wasn't there when I sat down on the toilet, and most certainly moved slightly when I saw it after looking up from my book. Strange, but doesn't really register enough to pull me from my book. As I open the door after I finish up, I see the piece of twine disappear from beneath the door, and that's when I see down the hallway what looks like a big black mass bounding. The size of a house cat maybe, but the shape of a ball that's kind of frizzy. It bounds off the wall around ankle height, back into the carpet and on the floor, and takes a hard down to the hallway into the kitchen. I stand in the hallway, just kind of stunned. I have no idea what I saw, but have no pets, and it made no sound or impact or weight as it bounded down the hallway away from me. I meekly made my way to my bedroom, which is right beside the bathroom, closed my bedroom door, and I'm pretty sure that I slept with my lights on that night. Could have been a giant rat, I know, but again, no sound, and it just wasn't the right shape. Age 15 now, and this is my one and proper shadow person story. So it was a Saturday night, and my parents had gone out late to do something, so they wouldn't be home until much later that night, and my sister was out that night as well, so I had the whole house to myself. And what does a 15-year-old do with the house to himself on a Saturday night? Why, he makes a massive pot of cheese pasta, drinks some of his dad's alcoholic cider, and listens to Led Zeppelin, which he just discovered a few months ago and is really feeling right now. Pasta on lap, cider in hand, and Babe I'm Gonna Leave You blaring on the family sound system. I sit down to enjoy myself when I see to my right, not a few feet away from where I'm sitting, a giant tall black figure. Whatever this is, it's tall and just a solid black shape of a man. I look at it for a few seconds from a right-hand angle, and I'm not too scared. If anything, I kind of feel serene and calm, which was really weird. I look away for barely a second, and it's gone. I'm still feeling calm, but after a few minutes, I start to feel uneasy after figuring what I just saw wasn't a normal thing. I turned on all the lights on in the house and finished my pasta and cider and waited for my parents to get back home. From the age of 15 to at least my mid-20s, nothing really interesting happens, nothing that I can remember anyway. I mostly live my life without anything weird happening. Age 25 comes around though, and at this point in my life, my girlfriend and I have just moved into a new house. It's cold and damp in the winter and has a weird layout, but it suits us and allows us to have our dog, so we're happy. I'm home alone after work, and I'm just sprawled out on the bed, still in my work clothes, on my phone, when I hear a male voice call out from the front of the house. Me, thinking that it's either the landlord or my father, I call back in response. But nothing. Thinking to myself, that's weird. I get up and check, since if someone was at the front door of the house, I'd be able to clearly see them, since our driveway is pretty long. So if someone was at the front of the house and had left, by the time that I got up, I would have plenty of time to still see them go down the driveway. But, as you probably suspected, there was no one there. And the weirder thing still is that my dog doesn't seem excited or distracted, like he normally is if someone was at the front of the house. I end up chalking that one to a weird noise or just an auditory hallucination again. Age 28, and my girlfriend and I have moved again, this time to a house that's not cold and damp during the winter and doesn't have a weird layout. After a few days of unpacking, we're finally settled in, and the first thing she wants to do is take a hot bath, since our last place had a bathtub so big the hot water would run out by the time the water reached your ankle in the tub. That evening, it was also my turn to cook dinner. So, her in the bathtub and me in the kitchen, with the dog sniffing around my feet, trying to see if I would drop any scraps for him. Out of nowhere, the dog runs out into the lounge from the kitchen, and I hear my dad laugh this distinctive laugh, which I've heard for my entire 20-plus year life. This is weird because I'm not expecting my dad at all, and weirder yet, I didn't even hear him come in the door, and it's not like him at all to not knock before he comes into the house. Even if he didn't knock too, the sliding door for the front patio was closed, and that makes a loud noise when opened. I call out to say something like, "Oh, I wasn't expecting you," but there's nothing. I walk into the lounge and no one's there. The dog is sitting on the couch, girlfriend still in the bathtub, and no one in sight. Again, too, this house, like the last house, there's only one way to the front, so if anyone was around, I could have clearly seen them. But again, there's no one, and I clearly heard my dad laugh. I get a little freaked out by this and text both my dad and my sister about what just happened. I text my sister telling her that I know it sounds stupid, but can she text Dad too? Something just feels weird. 5 minutes later, Dad texts back saying that what just happened was strange, but he never came around and he's at home having dinner with Mum. I know that I heard my dad laugh though, and then I think back to that one time when I thought I heard someone at the old house and how I thought that that could have been my dad too. Again, I chalk this up to just a bizarre auditory hallucination, but this time I'm a little less self-convincing because I know what I heard. A few months after that, I had a dream where I woke up because I had heard my dad fall over and call out for help. I didn't see this in my dream, I just heard it. The sound of a person falling over in a really bad way and my dad calling out for help. This one was just a dream, but it was weird and kind of surreal, so it stayed with me for a few days. On the Saturday of the week of the dream, my dad and I were in a car and the first thing I mention is this dream. He kind of laughs nervously and then tells me that the same day he had a dream about my grandmother who passed away a few years ago. And in this dream, she too had fallen over and was calling out for him to help her. And that one I can't really explain. I've asked my parents if they've ever experienced anything paranormal or weird in the family home, but all I got was laughs and a solid round of no. My sister currently lives in our family home, and I've talked to her about my experiences. My niece sleeps in my old bedroom, and my sister swears that she's always gotten a really weird and creepy vibe whenever she's putting away my niece's clothes or is cleaning up in there. I'm mostly sharing these stories with you all because, well, I enjoy hearing them myself, and I guess that I would like to get some feedback too. But if you guys have any input or advice, I would love to hear it. Thanks for listening.